Good morning. I think we have a quorum present, so we can begin our business, and we have a fairly lengthy agenda, but I want to begin by welcoming everybody to the 28th meeting of this Executive Committee of the City of Toronto. We acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. A reminder that you can watch us on live on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live, or follow the meeting on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? And if so, please indicate the item, number, and the nature of your interest. Going once? Going twice? Okay. May I have a motion, please, to confirm the minutes of the Executive Committee meeting of September 26, 2017? Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Burnside, all those in favour? Opposed? Carried. So, let us proceed with a review of the agenda. And I'll just draw to your attention the fact that item 2814 is a public notice item, and therefore we can't deal with it until 10 o'clock. So even if it's not held down, we will have to hold it down, in effect, until just after 10 o'clock, because it's a public notice item. But that just means we can deal with it later on, depending on what your wishes are. So, item 28.1, there's going to be a presentation made on that, Smart City Initiatives. That's been held down for before. Item 28.2, the Parks and Recreation Facilities Master Plan is being held both for a presentation and for deputations. Item 28.3, the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund Phase 1 update is being held for deputations. Item 28.4, campaign for provincial funding for municipal infrastructure is being held for deputations. Item 28.5 is the Police Transformational Task Force report and impacts on city divisions. There's a recommendation there to accept the recommendation moved by Councillor Ainslie. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item 28.6 is being advancing fare integration, being held for deputations. 28.7, the Toronto Atmospheric Board Fund recommendation to amend open meeting requirements of the Toronto Atmospheric Act. 28.5. Councillor Menon-Wong Deputy Mayor Menon-Wong is moving recommendation number 2. Councillor DeGiorgio, all those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item 28.8, Community Space Tenancy Policy. The disposition is to adopt the recommendations in the report. Motion from Deputy Mayor Bylaw, Councillor McMahon, all those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item 28.9, which is the developing terms of reference for an LGBTQ2S advisory body, is being held for deputations. Item 28.10, Home for Good program implementation plan. The disposition is to adopt the recommendations in the report, moved by Deputy Mayor Bylaw, seconded by Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. 28.11, the summary of the city's donation activities for 2016 held for deputations. 28.12, update and next steps on the potential relocation of the Etobicoke Civic Centre, being held for deputations. 28.13, Toronto's Emergency Management Program and revisions to the Toronto Municipal Code, being held for deputations. Item 28.14 is the matter I referred to earlier, so it can't be dealt with. We'll hold that down until after 10 o'clock at some suitable time and see what your wishes are on that. Item 28.15, lease agreements with Scarborough Rouge Hospital and the YMCA of Greater Toronto for the development of the Bridal Town Community Hub. The suggested disposition is to adopt the recommendations in the report. Motion to so do, Councillor Ainslie, Councillor McMahon, all those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item 28.16, the Legacy Restoration Project update, Toronto Council Fire Native Cultural Centre, is being held for deputations. Item 28.17, implementation of new before and after school program guidelines and policies update, being held for deputations. Item 28.18, occupational health and safety report, quarterly and end of year 2016. Motion to adopt the recommendation from the Employee and Labour Relations Committee, moved by Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor Crawford. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item 28.19, EX 28.19, Occupational Health and Safety Report, first and second quarters for 2017. Recommended disposition here, adopting the recommendation from the Employee and Labour Relations Committee. Moved by Councillor Crawford, Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 20, EX 28.20, non-union cost of living adjustment. Recommendation here to accept the recommendation coming from the Employee and Labor Relations Committee, moved by Deputy Mayor Menon Wong. Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The 28.21, results of the interest arbitration with the Toronto Professional Firefighters Association, Local 3888, International Association of Firefighters, IAFF. Recommendation that we adopt the recommendations from the Employee and Labor Relations Committee. Moved by Councillor DeGiorgio, seconded by Councillor Ainsley. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. EX 28.22, precarious work at the City of Toronto. Councillor Deputy Mayor Menon Wong has a motion. Deputy Mayor Menon Wong moves that the item be referred to the Executive Director, Human Resources. Ready to call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item 28.23, EX 28.23, public ramps, private ramps on public rights-of-way being held for deputations. Item EX 2824, transportation services, cycling infrastructure and programs, open data, transportation services being held for deputations. EX 28.25, transportation services, cycling infrastructure and programs, open data, bike share ridership being held for deputations. EX 28.26, Toronto Parking Authority, open data, Toronto Parking Authority being held for deputations. Item 28.27, is the hosting of all candidates' meetings permitting payment of expenses from the constituency service, office, and budget held for deputations. Item 28.28, EX 28.28, reforming joint and several liability for Ontario municipalities, and it's a decision of the committee as to how to address that, and there are no deputations on it. And there is a recommendation here coming from the original motion. Are you moving that, Councillor Ainsley? Seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item 28.29, support for reform of municipal class environmental assessment process. It's the same. It's coming forward as a result of a motion, and it was moved by Councillor Ainsley. Are you prepared to move this as well, Councillor Ainsley?
I think there's a deputation.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. It's being held for deputations. EX 28.30, supporting the creation of a dedicated fund to enhance municipal asset management planning. And this, as a result, again, is a move by Councillor Ainsley because it comes forward from his original motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 28.31, a request to the Integrity Commissioner on the propriety of members of council jointly hosting events with the city's unions. There is a deputation on that. May I just say, just because I think we now, subject to the different holds and things, I just wanted to mention quickly that we have just approved EX 28.15, the Bridal Town Community Hub, at the stages that it has reached. And I just want to acknowledge here that this is the result of an effort of many, many people over a long period of time, including Councillor Norm Kelly, including members of the legislature, a number of individuals who are here today because they have a keen interest of volunteers, community volunteers, healthcare people. It was the subject of an announcement we made up at the hospital of a new dialysis clinic, which I think is going to be a wonderful resource for the people there. And I want to thank all the people involved, including members of this council, for their efforts on moving this project forward, which is going to have a very long positive impact on the community. And I want to make sure that people understand the city, in approving this today, has had a very significant role in causing this to happen in terms of the basis upon which we were prepared to have this property used. And so I just want to really, though, say thank you and to acknowledge the people who came here today, obviously hoping the matter has gone through as it has. And I think just before we move on to actually deal with the agenda, Deputy Mayor Bilo also wanted to acknowledge the presence of some people here today in our midst.
Yes, I would like to acknowledge the presence of some members of 416, the President, Eddie Mariconda, and Matt Fligliano, the VP. Many of you, including yourself, Mayor, participated on Friday on the flag raising for the 100th anniversary of Local 416. So as good partners, I would like to acknowledge, where are they? Eddie and Matt. Come on. And all their members and the good work that they do in our city. It's 100 years. It's a milestone. I think we need to recognize all the good work, and please convey our appreciation to all your members. And we continue to appreciate everything they do day in and day out for our city. So thank you, and to 100 more years.
Now, before we move on, I will just note that there's a bit of a hubbub coming from this side of the room. And so if I could ask that you please keep the conversations to a minimum, that would be super. I will say on the first item then that's up for our consideration, which is 28.2, the Parks and Recreational Facilities Master Plan, the one deputant who is here has withdrawn. And so we do have, however, a presentation, and I'm sure there will be questions of staff because it's a very significant plan that's come forward. So I would ask Ms. Romoff and whoever else is going to be part of the presentation to come up to the front, and we'll get started.
What happened with item number 1, the smart city presentation?
Oh, you know what? I made a mistake. Because I forgot, because it's not on my deputant's green list, it's on my orange list that we, of course, and that's why I'm wondering why Mr. Williams is giving me hand signals. I mean, at least it was a positive kind of hand signal, but it wasn't one of those other ones. But you would have had reason to give me a negative hand signal, Mr. Williams. I was just checking to see if you were awake, even if I wasn't. And of course, everybody was far too polite to say, excuse me. Had a small agenda malfunction here. Smart City Initiatives, Mr. Williams and company, you're most welcome, and thank you for being here, and over to you.
Sure, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor. It's our privilege. Everybody knows my colleagues here, Rob Meikle and Michael Colm. Some of you might not have met the still new Chief Transformation Officer. We just want to give you a very quick snapshot of the discussions and all the work, and there's a lot of work been going on in terms of whether you call it smart city, smarter city, intelligent city, any one of those terms. And we're going to walk quickly through a deck, and the three of us will share the speaking roles. Next slide, please. So one way of conceptualizing the smart city approach to the world is to say that there are three legs to this stool. The first leg, and probably in many respects the most important leg for this audience, is what we in the city are doing for making sure that our services are done most efficiently, effectively, and work best for all the residents, businesses, and visitors to the city by using technology in its most modern, efficient, and impactful way. The second leg is making sure that we have an infrastructure, basically communications, electronic communications, digital communications, that's there. We're not going to spend any time talking about that today because we have a report coming in the next month on assessing the state of the digital infrastructure in the city, with this particular focus on making sure that we don't have a digital divide either by geography or by cost. And so that report will be coming, and we'll deal with it at length there. The basic line is we're not bad, but we have some significant challenges coming forward, especially with 5G technology. And then the third one is, what are we doing with the whole ecosphere in terms of making sure that there are suppliers, users, the city, all working together to make sure that our infrastructure and our services are as smart as possible, and that we build the expertise in the city so that we can sell it elsewhere. So the aspect of being able to build a sector that exports our skill sets, which often will include the fact that we need to have a demonstration here in the city of those competencies. So we'll quickly go through all of them. We'll start with the first leg or pillar, and that is how the city is doing. And Rob is leading a lot of that work.
All right, good morning, everyone. First, just as a level setting, when we refer to smart city, really what we're talking about is using technology and data to optimize city resources, while most importantly improving the quality of life for people that live, work, and play in the city of Toronto. And as part of that, a smarter city approach includes innovative policies and processes to ensure that the benefits that we're talking about are realized in a timely manner. This market is truly an emerging and growing market. According to Forrester, the market for smart city products and services is forecasted to be $1.3 trillion per year by 2020 and to grow to $2.0 trillion per year soon after. So it's really a growing and emerging market, as there are several solutions that are available for cities. So it goes beyond technology, but it's an opportunity to drive service excellence through these emerging solutions, but also guided by good governance, making sure that we're prioritizing where the best investments can be realized. And Mike touched on it, ensuring that we have a digital infrastructure that can accommodate not only the solution in this emerging market today, but for years to come. So we continue in this pursuit in terms of looking for opportunities for modernizing processes, technologies to enable, manage, and integrate service delivery, ultimately driving service excellence. Next slide for me. So in the industry, just a quick little baseline on what's going on in the industry. Not too long ago, smartphones were considered like a nice to have, right? If you had one, you were kind of like leading edge. Now, something like smartphones and mobilities are integrated into our daily lives, and it's kind of expected. Most of us probably walking with one or two in this building today. Really, it's the way that citizens are interacting with government, businesses are interacting with government, and interacting with each other. So we've seen various technologies that are emerging and contributing to the overall Smart Cities plan. According to analysts, according to the CRTC, in 2016, 86% of households in Canada had a mobile phone. And I think that really speaks to really how people not only interacting on a day-to-day basis, but really their expectations on how they're going to interact with government. This particular industry, mobility, is expected to grow to $150 billion globally in the next 2 years. Another one that's contributing to the way that we interact, utilizing smart city technologies, is the cloud. Cloud solutions are simplifying and accelerating the delivery of integrated solutions. In other words, we're moving the complexity from the city's premises to various vendor premises, which allows us to deploy solutions rather quickly. By 2018, industry indicates that over 80% of IT organizations will commit to various cloud solutions. Another big one that's contributing to really, again, not only technology but data is big data. Big data has given us new and important insights to operational and service excellence. We are really focused on not trying to just solve symptom of problems, but get to the root of problems so that we can drive meaningful solutions for the city. People and organizations are becoming more data-centric. And today's world, digital content is expected to double every 2 years. In other words, there's a lot of data, which means there's a lot of analytics, which should drive to better decision making. Another emerging and really growing one right here in the city of Toronto is artificial intelligence and machine learning will open up a world of opportunities, again, changing fundamentally business models and how we interact. In fact, Toronto is the global center for artificial intelligence and using AI to foster economic growth and unlock opportunities to improve the quality of lives of Canadians. So we're seeing all of this contribute, these things as baseline, contributing to the Internet of Things, which is really leveraging the Internet to put sensors and various technologies so that we can drive towards a smart city. So from a City of Toronto perspective, next one for me, for the City of Toronto perspective, there are many aspects that are already in motion. I'm not going to talk about all of these, but really just to highlight several really good things that are in progress, that have already been implemented, and give an indication of the baseline that's already there that we can build upon. First one I'll talk about is the City Services Benefits Card, and that one was a really great example of really modernizing city processes within the Toronto Employment and Social Services, implementing the benefits card, otherwise known as the Dignity Card, providing electronic payment method for social benefits via Ontario Works to over 100,000 citizens. This has really provided an opportunity of really removing traditional paychecks to moving to a debit card style transaction, which has drive simplification and improve service excellence. Another example of really leveraging technology and data is the Toronto Water, where they've gone digital, really through the automated water meter program, which in the past required a lot of manual effort in terms of gathering meter readings, whether from customers or from the city, and going to a completely digital solution. They've improved the efficiency on how they administer really a critical service for the City of Toronto, and at the same time realizing tangible savings of $33 million over a 5-year period. They've built upon that, really looking at additional, I call it modernization opportunities by implementing the My Water Toronto web-based tool, which allows citizens now to look at their own individual water usage, which has allowed them to drive efficiency and drive environmental sustainability goals by making sure that they're using water in an efficient manner. We've also seen some other areas of just utilizing technology in a smarter aspect through the Toronto Library. They have their own computer learning center. They've also implemented a digital innovation hub, which presents the opportunity for citizens to have access to 3D design and printing, digital design workstations. In other words, providing access to technology, to Wi-Fi, to various emerging learning centers in a manner that perhaps they don't have access to, but now through our libraries they have access to that. One of those examples are Wi-Fi hotspots, which allows not only Wi-Fi within the library, but an opportunity for citizens to sign out Wi-Fi. Another recent example is our Vehicle for Hire program. That was an industry award-winning solution as the city modernized its legislation back in May 2016, which included a whole bunch of recommendations and really a landmark policy change in the ground transportation industry, and went from pretty well a predominantly manual process to a completely digital process. Another one is our big data innovation team, where our transportation division is using data to really improve the analytics, not just from a hindsight perspective, but also looking forward for driving optimization in our various traffic patterns. So we've seen a lot of these types of solutions that are being implemented. Most recently, an announcement that hopefully everybody's heard about from Waterfront Toronto, where that's one of our open access high-speed connectivity communities. And we saw the announcement of the Sidewalk Labs, which really a company tied to Google is using our Toronto waterfront as their living lab. The waterfront has attracted a lot of global leading innovative companies, attracting knowledge workers, and Sidewalk Labs is now bringing a lot of their smart city solutions to really pilot it within that environment. So what we want to do is to continue to build upon that, and as we move forward, really our strategy is to continue to adopt various technology and data-centric solutions. So continue to keep a focus on city modernization in a timely and effective way with a relentless focus on citizen-centric solutions. In other words, making a difference for citizens and businesses in the City of Toronto as we drive and as we are committed towards a digital government. We're committed towards that by really enterprise citywide transformation. So not just automation, but how do we drive transformation, fundamentally changing the way that we do some things in a more effective way. And leading that way is, to my right, of course, Michael Combe, our Chief Transformation Officer, who's really driving corporate-wide, large transformation initiatives in a timely manner so that we can realize those benefits as quick as possible. We also have our citywide resilience planning led by the Chief Resilience Officer. So we're continuing to look for those opportunities and looking for ways that we can drive them quicker and faster. Another key part of our strategy is not just adopting technology and data-centric solutions, but enabling. And part of the enabling is really driving towards more open data, which is making more data sets available so that we can leverage not only city divisions, but the industry to identify innovative ways we can drive solutions and meaningful solutions for the City of Toronto. Part of the enabling, again, mentioned a little bit earlier, is the internet connectivity. If we're going to be driving towards smart solutions, we've got to make sure that we shrink the digital divide. In other words, regardless of making sure that everybody has access to these solutions. So as we do the assessment, Mike mentioned earlier, the broadband assessment, we want to make sure that Toronto has the right coverage. Coverage includes access with options along with affordability. And we want to do that assessment because make sure that we lay the footprint so that we're closing the digital divide and not increasing it. And along with just doing various analytics so that we can provide equal access for people in Toronto. And then finally, continue to drive innovation. Innovation is really continued to be driven in this organization through the Civic Innovation Office, where they're taking on a challenge and driving a solution that will make a difference for the City of Toronto, but also continuing to make innovation not just a project, but really about a mindset, looking for innovation in every part of our day-to-day work and operations, looking for those opportunities to continue to drive improvements for the City of Toronto. So we're looking for to continue to build upon some innovative things that are already in motion. The city was part of the first blockchain pilot in Canada. That was a partnership between the City of Toronto and the province of Ontario, really looking at those emerging technologies to drive simplification and improvement for the City of Toronto. So these are really some of the things that we're doing on the innovation side as we continue to adopt, enable, and drive innovation. Back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Rob. So we're not doing this in isolation from the rest of the community. We've been working very closely with the suppliers and with the representatives of the major users of technology. Susan Vegas, I should have introduced at the beginning, in my division, and Grant Coffey in Rob's division have been leading a project with the Toronto Region Board of Trade that's resulted in a strategy called a call for collaborative action. It's a large group involving many suppliers, many users, many representatives of the business community, working with the city and many different divisions in the city. A number of trade shows, conferences have been held to bring in expertise from outside of the city as well to inform us. As you can see on the slide, it was established for three reasons. Basically, and Rob addressed this a little bit, the communication is the most important part so that everybody understands the possibility and the potential. Try to catalyze action, keep people's feet to the fire, so to speak, and that's been happening as well. And then create a forum so that new things that come up, new opportunities that can come up will be acted upon. There are 5 recommendations with covering everything that you would expect to see in a kind of group endeavor here, collaboration being the most important one, especially between the city and many of the suppliers. A lot of the suppliers are global companies that have developed a practice across the world and can bring best practices to Toronto as they can take best practices from Toronto to the rest of the world. To catalyze, to create use situations in which the city can benefit from it, connect with all of the possible suppliers and inventors. And Rob talked about the sidewalk labs, so things coming out of from non-traditional suppliers, the Arabs of the world and the Ciscos and the Siemens and the IBMs of the world are the traditional ones, but then we see game changers being brought in from the Googles and potentially Amazons of the world. Co-create, all of these problem solving, all of the innovation should be towards problem solving and improving, and that takes co-creation to do that. No one single person operating in isolation can accomplish in a much more complicated world what needs to be accomplished. And then finally, the communication of it as is so critical. Rob's going to talk a little bit about first steps, and then Michael's going to talk about one immediate challenge that we have.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So as we move forward, part of smart cities is understanding that the ecosystem involves a lot of partnership within the organization, partnership within the industry, as Mike mentioned, some of the global leading ICT vendors, small, medium, and large. So it's a large ecosystem that involves quite a lot of stakeholders. And so as we move forward, we want to continue to build upon a strategic, not only framework, but a strategic roadmap that helps us, deliver these solutions with value and in a timely manner. So under the city manager's leadership, what has been established is a administrative steering committee. The two mics left and right are part of that, and we're going to continue to foster that collaboration and that partnership across the organization as we leverage the ecosystem that can deliver value for the City of Toronto. And one of those opportunities in terms of partnership is the Canadian Federal Smart Cities Challenge. This is a great opportunity for the City of Toronto, and Michael Combs is going to talk about that further. And we're going to take advantage of that opportunity that's ahead of us and build it into our Smart Cities roadmap. And when we talk about a roadmap, we're talking about there's various things in the ecosystem happening within the organization, happening outside of the organization, fitting all of that together in a systematic way so that we can continue to deliver value, not only for the City of Toronto, but drive towards service excellence. So Mike's going to talk a little bit further, specifically what's happening in the Canadian Federal Smart Cities Challenge.
Thank you very much, Rob. Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to take a couple more minutes and update the committee on the federal government Smart Cities Challenge. So the federal government has signaled that in the very near future, we think probably November, they will officially launch what they're calling a Smart Cities Challenge. Our understanding of their plan, and we don't have all the details yet, is that they're going to make $300 million available over some number of years that cities and other organizations, and there'll be different categories of the challenge. But cities, and municipalities can compete for getting some of that money to basically get going on an infrastructure-focused smart city challenge. And this one will be infrastructure-focused because it's coming through the Ministry of Infrastructure and Communities. There will be some different categories, as I say. There'll be some money for small cities, some money for medium cities, some money for large cities. We're quite excited about this opportunity to get organized around this particular challenge. Start that, get a little bit more dialogue going on within the city and the ecosystem that Rob mentioned in terms of potential partners and other institutions out in the community that we could work with on this. But we're going to get going on that. As Rob mentioned, we have formed a steering group within the city here, and that will be led by myself through the city manager's office, and we're going to get organized around that. It will be an inclusive consultative process to identify what problem we want to go after. Working with, again, the overall ecosystem to sort of funnel all the great ideas that exist and that we've already heard, and really make a decision on what we're going to sort of propose and go after some of this money. The criteria, we know a little bit about the criteria. Again, very consistent with the themes we would have brought to the table anyway. Citizen-focused, social return on investment, leveraging the data that we have at the city, being able to scale it. If we start on something that's geographically limited, being able to scale it to a wider geography within the city. Those will all be themes on it. We're going to work hard to come up with the really best proposal we can and really try to win some of that funding. So that should start in the next month or two. You'll hear more about that as we get underway and we really narrow down our the problem we want to go after and really start solutioning how we're going to do that. Thank you very much. I think that concludes our presentation.
Well, thank you very much to all of you, and we would now move to questions from pardon me, the members of the committee or visiting members of council. I'll start to see if there are any of our visitors who are not members of the committee who wish to ask any questions of the panel. Councillor Carroll?
Yes. Well, I'll start with the last first, the Federal Smart Cities Initiative. So I'm trying to understand the timelines and what money is really available to us. 300 million spread over 11 years and actually for small, medium, and large cities is not a lot of money. So is the work that you're doing initially now, is that about applying? Is that about proposing? Or do we already have an idea of what our share is going to be?
Yes, through the mayor. Yes, we have an idea that they're going to target $50 million for a large city to launch an initiative. That's what
Okay.
they've signaled so far. We don't really have any much more details at this stage. The challenge has not been officially launched. We expect that to happen in
Right.
November.
Right.
And the focus of this group would be on the bid process, the response process, which looks like it may extend through to March or April timeframe.
Oh, okay. And you'd be looking at, you know, our proposal is we've done this much on a project-based sort of initiative. Here's what we build upon on what we already have.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, I see. And is there a sense of direction from council, or is it just looking at what's missing in the overall Smart Cities initiative? I guess, is council to discuss? I mean, my own dream is the affordability piece. We have a huge number of residents for whom the fact that they have a couple of cell phones and need Wi-Fi access causes them to be late on their rent. And so affordability is my own particular favorite, and if there was a project that could help us get there, that's what I'd want. But as council, do you have a sense from council of what our preferred direction would be, or are we just going to build it on what we have now?
Through the chair, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, that's a great question. Part of this steering committee that we've established is to build out the mechanical process. So we still are working out what is the sequence of steps that we're going to take to make sure that, A, we're being comprehensive and broad and also successful in terms of identifying and submitting an application to receive the award, but also being cognizant of the engagement process within our organization. So we're still working on that. We'll have a little bit more clarity, and it will be crystal clear. We recognize that communication needs to come forward.
Yeah.
And that will be forthcoming too.
Okay, and lastly, through you, Mr. Mayor, just wanted to know the report on our overall digital infrastructure report next month. Where to? Where should we look for that report?
It's coming to hearing.
Oh, totally.
No, that's.
It's coming to economic development and culture.
Oh, okay, excellent. Okay, thanks. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Carroll. Any other members of council not on the committee that are here that want to ask questions? I don't see any. Members of the committee, then we're ready to move to that. Councillor Ainsley and then Councillor Robinson.
Thank you for the presentation. So I had a couple of questions. One was around retrofitting infrastructure. Because most of the city, as opposed to what Sidewalk Labs is proposing, we're going to have to retrofit the infrastructure. And I'm just wondering how that plays into the plan or the project or the guidelines.
I'll start, and then Rob can correct me and add to me. Part of the report that we're bringing does address some of the communication challenges. I think 5G is the new technology that sort of people will leapfrog to, that creates sort of an omnipresent, instant-on world. Rob may want to talk more about what that means for the city itself.
Again, through the chair, thank you, Council, for that question. When we talk about retrofitting the infrastructure, I'm just going to just a little bit of clarity too. So we're talking about our digital infrastructure within the City of Toronto administrative, let's call it boundaries, but also geographical. This particular broadband assessment is, we actually brought in a consultant to take a look at what is the digital footprint for the City of Toronto geographically. In some areas, i.e. the downtown core, you have all the major service providers here, 3+, and the latest technology like 5G coming in, and in other parts of the city, that's not the same. So this study is actually going to quantifiable give us where do we stand. Then from that, the retrofitting will be kind of twofold. Retrofitting may include some of the things that reside within the city's actual domain, which we actually have control over. And also retrofitting would include what's happening in the industry. Are all of our major providers in the utmost east part of the city or utmost west part of the city? And then from that, having some what we call industry dialogue with our partners in this ecosystem to make sure that that digital footprint is consistent and makes sense across the city. So it'll be a couple of ways that we approach it, but it's the right question, right focus, because if the foundation isn't there, we won't be able to lay on a lot of these solutions.
Okay. And then I also wanted to ask about citizen privacy. I didn't see too much in the initial outline about citizen privacy, and often when we talk about, people ask, when it comes to smart cities, how much of their own personal privacy are they going to have to give up, or how is that data going to be secured when we have sensors and video cameras all over the place?
I'll take that. Through the chair again, Councillor. Every initiative that we do, technology related, in addition to that, we do through, we work with our corporate information management division under the clerk's office to do that assessment. So every technology, because nearly every technology has some sort of data element, every project we do an assessment to make sure that we're protecting citizens and information privacy and security and those components.
Okay.
That's actually built into the way that we deliver solutions.
Okay. And then my last question, Mayor Tory, I just wanted to ask about the federal funding, because $300 million over, I believe it was 11 years. If you compare it to somebody where like India, who has their 100 smart city plan, where they're investing close to $7.8 billion over 5 years. So I'm just trying to figure out the money that the federal government's announced, is that like their first step and they're asking for feedback from municipalities, or do you have any idea how that's being rolled out or looked at, or it's going to be reviewed? Because $300 million over 11 years, when you look at other cities around the world that are kind of at the forefront of smart cities, seems pretty small.
Yeah, so, again, the challenge hasn't officially been launched, so we're not exactly sure how that's even 300 million is all going to work, Councillor. The signals that they've given to us are that they would like to use this challenge as a way to start the conversation, start more activity, encourage municipalities to get organized around the conversation, and start forming that ecosystem, start building strategies around how we're going to leverage data and analytics to start on that journey. It's really their indications to us have been that it's a catalyst to get us going. And I think there's a realization that there's a significantly larger investment going to be required over many years to really make meaningful headway on the smart cities agenda.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Ainsley. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm just wondering about this initiative, Smart Cities, and how it impacts congestion and gridlock, because certainly that's one of the biggest issues we face. And so how will this initiative help ease that issue? I was looking for some more tactical ideas and thoughts around that.
Through the chair, thank you. I think I'll kick off the answer to this question, and my colleagues may weigh into that. A couple of points. When we're looking at smart cities, we really want to make it real, right? So it's not about just theory, and it's not just about technology. It's about identifying municipal city problems and looking for ways to solve those problems, whether through technology or through data. Those are really the two really key things. Specifically for the City of Toronto, there are a lot of vendors and a lot of companies worldwide that are developing solutions around the traffic space. Smart Cities leverages what we call a lot of technology around sensors, whether it be around sensors to measure and gather more intelligence and data utilizing Wi-Fi and other networks. And so there's a proliferation of solutions in the transportation space. Specifically for us, a lot of the emphasis has really been around the data and the data analytics, gathering as much data as possible so that you're not solving the symptom of a problem, you're actually solving the root of the problem. We are on that emerging curve. In our transportation division, they have a whole data analytics team and continuing to harness that and identify some patterns that will lead to some meaningful solutions. From specific technologies, there's technologies that are being looked at, being considered, being reviewed, that will go through the city's process in terms of when we're looking for a solution, competitive way of identifying the best solution to meet our needs. We're still growing in that area. There's some specific solutions that are being utilized right now, but there is a world of opportunities that are out there. We're trying to, through the governance committee and working across the various divisions, trying to come up with a systematic way of how do you identify those best solutions that will deliver the greatest value for the City of Toronto. And so I know I didn't give you like line by line what are the specific technologies or solutions, but that's really where we are in terms of trying to make sure we identify the best for the city.
Okay, here's just a broader question, just big picture question. What are the concrete outcomes of this? I mean, we've heard a lot of, interesting kind of strategies cited, but how at the end of the day is the city going to benefit from this? I mean, it's a curve that we have to stay on. I understand that, but what are the concrete outcomes?
Again, through the chair, Councillor, we've done some initial, what we would call use case analysis. We've worked actually with some companies where utilizing industry available data, what kind of use cases, when I say use cases, developing the business case to identify where the greatest opportunity is. And the measurable outcomes that are being driven in those use cases are, where can you find tangible, measurable cost savings? Where are there revenue opportunities? Where are there efficiency improvement areas? Where are there specific and measurable customer service opportunities? So really, those things will come out of the business cases. Because there's so many technologies available out there, we could be chasing technology. The idea is let's identify and go after business value. So those use cases are going to be the guiding factor for us when we're looking for where can we get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of investing in this particular space. And we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're utilizing some companies that have done this for cities worldwide. So let's see where some other cities have derived benefits and see if those are opportunities for benefits for us in a clearly defined and measurable way.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. That would bring us to Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in October of 2013, Economic Development discussed the following motion, brought their establishment of free public wireless internet in Toronto parks, civic squares, privately owned public space, and interested business improvement areas request for report. So it's a report only. And council referred it to economic development, and then it was actually referred again to government management, which deferred the item indefinitely. So this thing kind of died. Do you think Toronto is ready for a smart city strategy when the political will is not there to move on some of your initiatives?
I'll take the question. Through the mayor, thank you, Councillor. Great question. Connectivity is very important. Items such as Wi-Fi, which increases access, is very important. That particular item that you're referring to, again, part of being smart is recognizing, I call it intelligent investments. Public space Wi-Fi globally, and there have been other cases, we've got to make sure that when we implement something like that, we can sustain it. And globally, and from my, I call it networking or analysis or industry awareness, those types of initiatives do best when there's a sustainable business model. In other words, not just the investment to put in the Wi-Fi, but the investment to sustain it. And where they've found the most sustainability is where they have partnered with industry. So that burden, financial burden, is not just on the city. So when we are doing this broadband assessment, we're going to be able to see our footprint and really, from a quantifiable and measurable way, to make sure that we have the right coverage to deliver the solutions that we're looking for.
I think when the general public looks to technology, they look at saving money and convenience. And I noticed that Presto and the Toronto Parking Authority app are actually not on your chart and on page 5. Two of the most substantive sort of smart city approaches in last year. Maybe that's just a space issue. But the people of Toronto are looking for things like better responses in crisis management, severe extreme weather crisis like the ice storm, or synchronized lighting to make their journeys easier on arterial roadways. Are you zeroing down or drilling down to practical aspects of the day-to-day lives of Torontonians, or looking at more of a macro sort of feel-good approach to technology?
Through the chair again, thank you for the question, Councillor. Definitely practical and meaningful solutions. The macro is really just to get us started. That's why I call it, it's like a smart cities framework. But really what we want to do is find those solutions that are actually making a difference, a visible difference, and really that will be adopted, not just put on a shelf to say we implemented this particular technology or implemented this particular data solution. And so that's why we're being intentional in terms of the methodical way of identifying those. That sheet you referred to, where we highlighted some examples, was only a sample. Those are great examples that could be added onto there. By no means saying one is less or more than the other. It's just really footprint space on a particular slide. But those are the type of things that we need to identify, and really identifying ones that we can execute rather quickly. But it's going to be the sum of the macro. That's why the engagement part is very important. So when we talk about open data, it's more than just data sets. It's about what data can we put in the industry's hands, and they can be a part of developing meaningful solutions for the City of Toronto. There will be some solutions that actually the city drives, and there will be some solutions that will be a part of being the catalyst of fostering innovation in the industry, whether it's industry partners or vendors that will be a part of delivering some of the solutions. And the sum of those will help us drive towards really meaningful smart city solutions.
Okay.
Can
All
I-
right,
can I
thank
just-
you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Councillor Shiner.
Am I on here? So, Mr. Williams, you wanted to add something?
I was just
Or
gonna
ask
add
a
that-
question. I was going to ask a question. What did you want to add?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think one of the things to realize on all of this discussion, this is not just incumbent upon the city itself. There are a lot of players in the ecosystem that we've referred to already that have a lot of solutions that they're bringing forward in partnership with us and many other cities. And it's how well we can leverage that will dictate how things happen. So the City of Toronto's economy is booming because of things like civic tech. So we have civic technology incubators at Mars, at CSI, and elsewhere in the city. We're looking at trying to build one ourselves here. Two, there is fintech and payment systems. I mean, eventually, presumably, you will not need a wallet. You'll just need this to do all your financial transactions. And I don't want to take up your time for questions, Councillor, so I'll end it there.
Thank you. So one of the concerns I always have is remembering back to the blackout when the city's power went down and nobody's cell phone would work because the system was overloaded and nothing else you had would work. Your cloud won't work, your computer won't work, nothing works. What are we doing to make sure that everything that you have on your chart over here, or all of our systems, are actually able to operate if for some reason one of the main hydro lines goes down or we have an instance again, which is going to happen?
So my old-fashioned telephone did work during all of that. So
That's right, but your old-fashioned telephone doesn't give you any of the solutions that you want. So can I, and instead of, because I don't think there's an answer, can I ask that you go back and try and figure that out with Toronto Hydro and come back to us the next time you update and say, this is what we're going to do to make sure that these areas are able to continue to have power and operate those cloud-based systems and everything else. Because the cloud warehouse building will operate, it'll have a backup generator, but we won't be able to get to it because our computers will be down. The second part I have, and maybe Mr. Cole, you can help me. It's wonderful to talk about everything we're going to do, but I'm sure when a division tries to work, as we will here, cross boundaries, there's walls. And those are walls that are in place within the divisions, because within each division we haven't really amalgamated throughout the city. and then division to division, we have an amalgamated. So can you tell me the challenge that you might have seen, the challenge that you envision, and how you think we're going to be able to tackle that? Because if you can't cross those boundaries, you can't achieve this goal.
Yes, so through the mayor, Councillor, good question. You know, I think we'd all agree that one of the foundational pieces, and Rob's talked a lot about the foundational components of a smart city strategy, is our ability to use data, share data, leverage data, analyze data to make decisions and in real time, and make decisions about investments and make decisions about what we're going to do as a city. That challenge around accessing data, what form is it in? We've got systems that can produce the data appropriately, and then can we share that across, even just within the city? It is a challenge. It's a challenge we're working on. There's a number of initiatives Rob's leading, I know, around our business intelligence and our data framework that we're trying, there's a significant effort to try to get better at
I'm
our
coming
use of
back
data.
to you,
Yeah.
because Rob can only go so far. Each division has an equal manager in each area. It takes someone through the city manager's office or transformation to be able to break down those walls and gain the cooperation. And this isn't a negative question. This is just the fact of a large corporation and one like ours. So if you haven't got there yet, is it something that you can tell us you'll work on, so when you come back for the next update, you'll be able to help us, or maybe the city manager can help me on that?
This is, and we supremely appreciate this point. This is an incredibly important observation, and Michael's role working with me, but very importantly working with the divisions, is to actually take a fundamental step back and look at some of these areas. And if we look at the city has a tremendous amount, for example, of enforcement and inspection effort, and to realize that we have inspection and enforcement across a wide variety of areas in municipal licensing services, in buildings, in transportation, in public health, in fire, in a whole variety of other areas. These are actually dealt with and have been dealt with historically and are dealt with in other municipalities as separate stovepipes. In fact, they are a very similar, if not identical, line of business that requires an enormous amount of integration across that. There are a couple of profoundly important opportunities we have in terms of creation of a digital platform that will allow that integration, which then empower managers who have not yet been empowered before with data, so that we can become a data-driven and ultimately high-reliability organization in areas we are frankly not at this point. So that is precisely the vision. We are late to this process, and we will do best efforts, but it is going to be very challenging to actually make that, and we will need to have significant new investment in order to make that actually happen, because we will not be able to let go of the existing inspection function until we have the new actual platforms in place.
All right, that concludes the time for Councillor Shiner's questions. I don't have anybody else on my list at the moment. And if that is the case, I will say thank you very much to our panel. And I think what we're being asked to do here is simply receive the presentation. And so I would ask for Councillor Carroll, did you have something you wanted to? Oh, you're quite right. I'm quite right. We're just receiving it, but we can. And so speakers, Councillor Carroll.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank the staff for the presentation, because I think it's important. I think we've demonstrated in our questions that we need the update periodically, because this work largely goes on within staff functions. I don't share some of the concerns or pessimism that I hear in some of my colleagues' questions. We can look at the blackout of 2005, but I look at two things. I look at the blackout of 2005 compared with the ice storm of 2013. And the technology itself, just what's coming at us from the free market, meant that disastrous time for a number of people in the city, in large swaths of the city, was a little better managed due to our own emergency preparedness, but largely due to the technology itself. The technology and the backups used to operate it were really there in first response, so we could begin to do the repairs, because that was a blackout where the problem was at our end, in our community and in our system. And there was a great deal of connectivity. The work that we did in our own political offices was done through technological connections. For those who were out for 8 days, those things were available to us. And so I look at the technology coming along, and as the city manager has said, us having to get together with it. My colleague, Councillor Pasternak, described the sad path of the free Wi-Fi in parks and other public spaces and POPs, and its end. But asked the question, is Toronto ready for this? And I would submit that Toronto is, but Council doesn't seem to be. Because Council didn't kill that motion, or Toronto didn't kill that motion. Toronto asked for that motion, Council killed it. I just returned from a personal vacation in San Francisco. And throughout the trip, I kept exclaiming and screaming at my daughter because I kept catching her on a cable car in Golden Gate Park, all over the city, using her phone and saying, Martha, you don't have a plan. Please, if you want to know something, let me know. My phone has a plan. And she kept calmly saying to me, I'm on Wi-Fi. And because she's 26 and not my age, she thought to check for Wi-Fi. She actually expects it to be anywhere. And in that city, it was. That's how far behind we are. All over Golden Gate Park, sitting in the back of a Surrey. She was telling us where to go next. We were only on a Surrey, pedaling our way through that park, because on Wi-Fi, on the way there, she found out that we could do that and how much it would cost and what we would do when we got there. That's not happening here. That's how far behind we are, which is why my concern is affordability. I see great leaps and bounds being made, and the data analytics that needs to happen. We invest in that because we think it's going to give us answers that are going to balance our budget. But the people that are going to use what we're building inside the city, our next employees, are out there zooming around in the community. And those who live in families that can afford $400 to $500 a month for what it takes to connect everybody in the family are going to be ready to work for us. But there is another group of Torontonians who spend the $400 to $500 a month to connect their family, and that is why they are on the payday loan hamster wheel. People are often embarrassed that they're on the payday loan cycle and that every month they go back and pay their $500 to $700 to $800 loan just to pay their phone bill and then take the loan out again because they know that's the only way they're going to be connected. I worry that those kids aren't our employees of the future. And that's why, in terms of preparing a proposal for the federal government or any other pot of money that comes along, if there isn't affordability worked into it, if that connectivity isn't in our poverty reduction strategy so that we're saying to other orders of government, and if we're grinning about this, I don't think it's funny that connectivity is driving people into the poorhouse. I just don't think it's funny. And so if when we've created a portal in childcare so that subsidized childcare moms can technologically do their means testing. But if we're not saying every time we talk to other orders of government, please factor in to your subsidies and your support mechanisms and how we decide how much is the right amount for ODSP or OW. Please factor in that our model in Canada is that they need that money to be connected and be a part of society. Then we haven't placed this initiative in the right strategy. It needs to be a part of the poverty reduction strategy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. I had Councillor DiCiano to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I want to thank Mr. Meikle for putting together this plan. It certainly makes sense conceptually, but I know from many discussions we've had that you're going to need buy-in from everyone else in this city to make something like this happen. This is an instrumental task, and it's not going to be something that's easy to overcome. What I'm going to be looking for through the budget process is to see how we are going to finance this project, and do we have, we've got so many long-term investments already in the books of things we want to do. We know that we have limited resources to do things we want to do. Where is this going to fit in that list of resources? What's going to come off the table so that we can start inserting this into the table? So between the city manager's office and your department, I'll be asking some questions at Budget Committee on how we're going to make this happen, because it's very, very important. Integrating all the information that this city produces would make us would give us the ability to actually start making decisions based on data. And we know that far too often our divisions just aren't making that information. Our staff, our counselors' offices are sometimes or often falling short on making decisions based on information. And probably the single most important thing this city could do to improve services for residents and outcomes is to start making decisions based on the right information. So thanks for the plan, but I'll be asking some more questions at budget time to see how this all fits in. Thank you for your hard work.
Thanks, Councillor DiCiano. Any other speakers from the council not on the committee? Okay, well then we can move to the committee, and I have Councillor Shiner.
So the reason for my questions, I think, are similar to other comments I've made in the past about the ability to challenge all the divisions to work together to bring forward the information and work collectively. It's something that's been difficult to do, and it's something that I think when you go into and you meet with others, unless they can see the benefit that they're going to get out of it, they're very wary of putting the time or the efforts in. That's human nature. If you don't see what you're going to get, you just may not deliver it because you've got so much else to do. So I really do challenge you, in particular Michael, as your role through the city manager's office, to find a way to show the deliverables that the divisions will get and to get their cooperation as you move forward on the most strategic programs, not everywhere. Find some that you can actually see the wins on, because you've got to deliver something. When we're updating programs within the city, it always seems that we're the last one to adopt a new program or an update or a change. It seems like it's the hardest to get that implemented within our divisions. Just getting onto a new Windows program seemed like a forever thing, and it's still ongoing. As well as the purchasing challenges that we have when we're trying to acquire things. So I think there's a real challenge within the organization that, and it's, please don't take it to be negative. We're a very large organization. We do almost everything that people think of any day in their daily life. We try and give them everything we can, but the electronic world, I mean, I look and I see the fella outside of a Shoppers Drug Mart with his hand out looking for some money, and then when I walked away, he took out his cell phone. Well, he was connected. Well, somehow he was able to afford that. We used to use payphones. Connectivity isn't always the perfect thing. And then I look, and how often do we see now people consumed with their heads down? One person's driving, the other person's on the phone, or at the table, the kids are there with the head down because they're connected. But what are they really achieving out of it? So find the deliverables that you can get us to show the things that we can do better, even if it starts, as the city manager said, with the inspection processes or other places that we can do that. And from my perspective, a smart city is one that uses our resources in a smart way to start to bring those benefits out to begin with, where people have accessibility on simple programs, and most of all, find a way to make sure that it doesn't go down. Because I'll tell you, 2005, the blackout was wonderful. It was one of the best evenings I had, when you actually sat with your family and talked with your friends and didn't have the TV on, and all those things were great, but that was in the summer. The ice storm was horrible, because that was in the winter, and people couldn't get their power back up, and all of a sudden their safety was an aspect in the safety of their home. So, it's be smart with what we do with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shiner. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to begin by thanking staff for coming here today and putting together, the very comprehensive presentation on what I think is going to be a very interesting process to follow, and I think the one that the city desperately needs to be involved in. And from my perspective, I look what we're doing as a municipality. Even since 2014, we've hired a chief transformation officer, we have a civic innovation officer, we hired a chief resiliency officer last spring, all things I think we need as we move forward as a smart city that has to be in place. And I think that when outside the municipality, when you're in the business sector, or we're looking for partners, because we're going to need partners to implement any type of smart city here in the GTA, Toronto or the GTA, I think that is very reflective and very promising from a business or a partner perspective when they're looking at what we're doing as a city. And because we're going to have a lot to do, when you look at other smart cities, you look at how they're building infrastructure in new areas like we're doing in the sidewalk labs down on the waterfront. But I think when we're repurposing infrastructure or adding to it, and when you're looking at a smart city, we're going to need those partners. I don't think we can do it all on our own. One of the concerns I have is with the federal government. When you look at other countries around the world, I mentioned India, for example. In my questioning, they have a 100 smart city program that cities have to apply to. And the government in India is putting close to $8 billion into that program over a 5-year period, where you look at the $300 million that I guess initially our federal government is looking at putting into the smart city program. I hope that that's just going to be the first step for the federal government, because we certainly can't do it on our own. And there's been some discussions, Mayor Tory, about that we're behind other cities. Well, if we are behind, and you can look at all the cities around the world, San Francisco, Barcelona, what some of the cities are doing in India, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from some of the things that they've done, some of the programs and infrastructure that they've put in place that we can do in Toronto. We don't have to have that huge initial capital outlay, because we can see what they're doing in other cities, how they're using technology to the best of their ability, and how we can utilize it here in the City of Toronto with our partners. So I want to thank staff for the work they've done to date. I've outlined some of my concerns around, in particular, privacy data concerns about privacy, or privacy about data concerns. Sorry, I think I need more coffee. But I want to thank staff. I think it's a great presentation showing where we are to date, and I look forward to seeing the updates. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ainsley. Other speakers to be heard from this morning? Councillor Robinson.
Just very quickly, I understand fully that this is about big data and IAs and all that's trending across the world. Given some of the speeches, I feel I have to speak up on the Wi-Fi, even though this is such a tiny part of this, but the Wi-Fi in parks and public spaces. I know a lot of my residents would be here if they knew that was the topic. And I know Adam Vaughan, former councillor Adam Vaughan, now an MP, had very strong opinions on Wi-Fi in public spaces. So I just want to also just identify that there's a lot of residents who are concerned about Wi-Fi in schools, concerned about Wi-Fi in parks, in public spaces where a lot of children, they don't really fully understand, my understanding is, and Adam Vaughan could speak to this more eloquently than I ever will be able to, but the impacts on children and Wi-Fi and cell towers that are popping up everywhere, certainly throughout my ward, they're popping up everywhere, and it's been proven when there's a few cell towers close together, or they're not monitored or managed, which I understand the federal government does, that can impact people's health. So I have to just identify that today, that we have to also be wary about that piece and keep that in mind. And for the children's sake, I think we have to make sure we know the full impacts on children's health and safety if we're ever going to look at this again. I know council did talk about this a long time ago, and Adam Vaughan championed fighting that, but he's no longer here. So I just want to make note of that and make sure that you fully understand that not everybody's on board with just making it a full Wi-Fi city.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Other speakers to be heard from on this matter? All right, well, I will thank you very much for your presentation and for answering questions and for being here for the speakers. And there is, as I was saying a few moments ago, the suggested disposition here that we simply receive the report receive the presentation, and I would ask for a motion to so do from Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Robinson. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you. Now we go to 28.2, and I gather it is the wish of the committee, which I've conveyed to Ms. Romoff, that we not, in fact, have a presentation, that the information might better come out in a more precise way in questions to staff. And so I might suggest that our friends from Parks and Recreation who are they at the ready? Do I see Ms. Romoff? Where's she gone now? Oh, there you are. Okay. We can't start without you. Oh, yes, the clerk has reminded me that it's now past 10 o'clock, so we could deal, assuming that there were no questions or other comments to be made, we could deal with item 28, is it 14, which was a public notice matter, so we had to wait until after 10 o'clock. There are no deputations on it, no one
I'll
wishing
move it.
to appear or speak. Is it moved by Councillor?
I'd be happy to move it.
Moved by Councillor Pasternak, seconded by Councillor Robinson. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you. All right, so we're ready for questions of staff. Who would like to begin on the Parks and Recreation's master plan, and that's item 28.2. Councillor Burnside.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I understand from the report that you talk about a catchment area of 2 to 2.5 kilometers.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. The catchment area of 2 to 2.5 kilometers, although not an exact science, it would depend on density and a number of other factors, but roughly and in general, 2 to 2.5 kilometers for a mid to large size community recreation center.
Do you put any emphasis on neighborhood improvement areas, or how do you, and do you use natural boundaries as well? So if I'm thinking of, let's say, Thorncliffe in Ward 26, how does that 2.5 kilometer range
So
work?
through you, Mr. Mayor, that you're correct on both fronts. There are natural boundaries that we would use in defining what that neighborhood might be. And through the consultations that we've done and through other planning processes that we know of, the neighborhood, quite often defines the area that it's willing to travel to. So we look at things like major arterial roads, safety of crossing, all those things to try and put things in the middle of a 2.5 kilometer area that wouldn't have those barriers to access.
So would it be fair to assume that in a more, I'll say, homogeneous area such as Mount Pleasant, Eglinton, Bayview, Eglinton, Yonge, and Eglinton, you could potentially be more than 2.5 kilometers, but where you have natural boundaries and a community that is in many ways described as how far the stroller will go in terms of their boundaries, that you would look at it differently, or is it more of a one-size-fits-all approach?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think what the plan tries to do is create some standards around how we would look at things. Having said that, the geography of the city and the demography of the city is not the same block by block, ward by ward, neighborhood by neighborhood. So we would use the overall criteria of the plan and try and keep within the boundaries of that 2.5. But as an example, in an area that is very dense with high-rise, apartments or condos, that 2.5 kilometer radius may be smaller because there would be a number of people that would meet the criteria within a smaller area.
So a different density, so once you
Correct.
hit that 34,000, for instance.
That's correct.
Okay, and then I really only have one other question, which is, well, actually two. So how much, it looks to me like you're putting a lot of emphasis on pools. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam, Mr. Mayor, there is an emphasis on pools. So, and the recommendation of the plan is that the 14 community recreation centers that we already have planned within the next 10 to 20 years, that each of those community recreation centers should include a pool. We know that from the size of our wait lists and also from the provision levels around pools in Toronto, which are very, very low compared to other municipalities, which also accounts for the long wait lists that we have in those areas. So the plan is to put in those 14 community centers a pool, but also over the 20 years to add 5 additional pools to existing community recreation centers to help deal with that demand.
And at what point do you look at the arenas? I know you looked at some of them, a few of them, but sir, I would say that if on a comparative basis, because you mentioned other municipalities, many of our hockey rinks are what you would call substandard.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have a wide range of aging infrastructure when it comes to arenas in the city. I say that in the most respectful way. We have a lot of single-pad arenas where a lot of newer municipalities have a lot of double-pad arenas with different levels of service. So the plan recommends that we keep with our existing plan, which is just adding 1 more pad of ice, eventually with the replacement of the Civitan Arena. But also that we look at how we can maintain and refurbish the existing ice that we have so that facilities are in the best shape possible.
Okay, and lastly, I know the budgets are always, they dictate a lot of what happens in any organization. Would the plan be any different and the timelines be any different were the projected potential budget?
Sure. So through you, Mr. Mayor, the plan does speak to 2 things, growth-related investments that need to be made, and that those growth dollars would for the most part, support those great growth-related projects. The plan also speaks for the need to increase our state of good repair funding and to replace some existing older community centers. And it's that area of the plan that we would struggle to increase our funding levels from what we currently have now. So I guess the short answer is we have a certain level of capacity to move forward with additional projects if some additional funding were made available. And the speed of when that funding is available would really determine how fast we can move on some of these things.
But the preference would be to go faster if you had the money?
It's a 20-year plan. I think if there was money that was made available, we certainly would take advantage of that money.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Burnside. Just 2 things I'll do. One is just to revert back. I wanted to just check. We did have 1 deputant who had registered in accordance with the rules who withdrew, and there wasn't anybody else who came into the room and indicated a wish to speak on this particular item, and I wanted to just make sure that was the case, that they may not have known they had to sign up. I see nobody. And secondly, we've just had arrive in our midst with pleasure Councillor John Campbell, and he's of course not a member of the committee, but he does want to ask some questions on this, and so we'll revert back to members of council who are here, not members of the committee, and over to you, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question is in regard to the location. So there's 2 facilities that are going to be, or in the plan, for new facilities in areas without adequate access. That's on page 25 of the report. How will you determine the location of where these facilities will be situated?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the plan did a rigorous review of existing facilities and provision levels to try and maintain our 1 to...
I mean, I get that. No, I mean, how will you determine the location of the facilities that are to be built within those wards?
I mean, that would be a process that we would, follow with our capital staff, where we would look for the appropriate size piece of land. And if it was in city ownership, we would use that piece of land. And if there wasn't an adequate land parcel available, we would seek to acquire that land.
And would the city be open to some sort of partnership arrangement or land swap arrangement with the TDSB were land to be made available?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we'd certainly be open to any conversation around any land that's available with any public sector partner.
Okay. And then I think this is probably my last question. Just it's again on page 25. In Part A, you identify a number of projects from the 10-year capital plan that are underway, and 2 facilities, Etobicoke Centre, Ward 5, North Rexdale, which were in the 2004 Recreation Facilities Report. 3 additional facilities, Downsview, East Bayfront, Portlands, that are identified to be built in the 10-year plan. And then the areas without adequate access to facilities. How will you how will staff go about prioritizing all of those projects? Because they can't obviously all be undertaken at once.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the plan would be to address gaps as a first priority, as these are areas of the city where there currently is population that is not adequately being served. And then on the Part A piece of page 25, and certainly that's already going forward, many of the new community centers would be built as the population fills in those areas. So it's gaps first, and the areas from the 2004 plan that have not yet been addressed, and then getting on to the other items as the population warrants it.
Great. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much. I too want to understand the next steps. So, and I'm not usually parochial, but I'm very pleased to see Stanwadlow, which is a local park in my area, being identified as the 11 for potential redevelopment. So how, and what are the next steps that my community can expect now that this site has been identified?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you should note that the report is in alphabetical order, not in order of priority. So although it might be number 11, does not mean it'll be number 11th on the list. Through the implementation strategy, we will be looking at the state of good repair of all of these buildings and come up with a list based on need for repair and how quickly we can address those repairs. And of course, if the funding that we have will also determine the pace at which we can start moving on some of these facility replacements.
So I'm still not really understanding what's next. So you're going to evaluate and pursue the revitalization or replacement of this list. So when will the state of good repair assessment take place? When will the, kind of identification of priorities? You're reporting back when? Priorities?
By the end of Q2. So before the end of this term of council, we'll be reporting back with an implementation strategy that will look at all those things and will divide the plan's recommendations in 5-year pieces.
Okay.
So, and
right.
that's the strategy around reporting back.
Okay, so we will know in the next report.
That's correct.
Whether they are 11 or 1 on the replacement list.
That's correct.
Okay. And as far as capital and the budget goes, what are you suggesting then? The implementation report will make recommendations for the capital budget for 2019 to 2023?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the implementation strategy will make recommendations beginning with the 2019 10-year capital plan. Our capital plans are approached in 10-year implements, and then the remaining 10 years of the plan will come forward in the next 10 years. But the implementation strategy will look at that full 20-year implementation and what's required in each of those years to move forward.
Okay, I remember the wording of the motion about the money said in the context of the overall budget, something or other, and I wondered what that meant.
Is there a specific recommendation?
Yeah, you know what, I'll have to find it before and I'll ask you again about this. And so gaps are first. How do gaps relate to these lists so there's a list of gaps, there's a list of revitalization. Those are finished. We have to finish the capital plan first, then there's gaps, then there's a list of revitalization?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the recommendation before Executive Committee is that we report back at the end of Q3 with the 20-year implementation strategy that will look at the prioritization of all these items that are recommended in the plan, as well as in 5-year implements the funding requirements for that. So it's all meant to come back together in one package.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Now, we can revert back, unless there are any other members with us from outside the committee, to the members of the committee. And I have Councillor Palacio to ask questions of staff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, to city staff, in the report it states that there is a huge waiting list of over 107,000 people there. Do you happen to have the breakdown of the waiting list by community centers?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't have that as part of the information in this report, but I can say that we will be reporting on the wait lists at the November meeting of the Community Development and Recreation Committee, and all of that information will be available. Certainly offline, we can give you any information on specific community centers.
Thank you. I'm going to refer now a bit more locally to the only community center that we have in Ward 17, the J.J. Pichinin Community Center. Due to the ongoing real estate activity that's taking place, the area has gentrified and is gentrifying tremendously with new families and in the thousands. And with that, of course, there is further pressures in terms of more green space, functional playgrounds, splash pads, and wading pools, and so on. And I should also note that, before I get to my question, is that Ward 17 tends to be the most parkland efficient in City of Toronto, and with some playgrounds that are totally outdated and very small and so on. So within that context, and how possible it would be to have a strategy, an implementation strategy that's flexible enough that will allow you to come back before the whole master plan is implemented to make some adjustments and perhaps recommendations for recreation centers that have been built in the 70s and that they're reaching that.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the plan does leave some flexibility to allow for consideration of additional things. And in the case of some of the older community centers, and as we've discussed, we're more than happy to have an extra look and a second look at a number of facilities to see how they can fit in with this plan in the long run.
A follow-up to that question, to that answer, is that do we have the names of recreation centers that have been built in the 70s or earlier, that they are 40 or more year olds, that they're reaching the...
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we certainly have all the information on the age and the functionality of all of the recreation centers in the city that are more than 40 years old. We've used some general criteria, as noted in the plan, to identify the community centers that, that in our opinion at this point need replacement in the long run. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at additional other community centers as part of that strategy when we come back with our implementation plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Palacio. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Tory. I just wanted to ask, and I missed part of the last questioning about, there's not a lot of mention in the capital project or guidelines about smaller community centers. And I mentioned that because in Scarborough, if I recall, Scarborough community centers were done on a geographical basis and not one by population. So some of the smaller ones, I'm just trying to understand where they're going to fit into the capital program, like Kern Hall, for example, in my ward.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, that you are correct that the plan does speak more specifically to mid to large size community centers from a planning perspective, which is not to exclude that we have many smaller community centers across the city. The plan speaks to the need to invest in state of good repair and also makes some consideration for expanding existing community centers that may be smaller when the need arises or when that state of good repair work is being done. So I think there is some consideration in the plan for looking at smaller centers as we move forward.
Okay. And the other question I had was further into the report where it talked about cricket pitches, which are very popular in Scarborough. And it said something about your plans were for one cricket pitch per 100,000 people. And the population of Scarborough, we've got 10 councillors, is about 700,000 people. And to the best of my knowledge, we only have 3 cricket pitches in Scarborough that the city owns, and I was just trying to figure out, I think there was a mention, there was a look at not building any more cricket pitches.
Through you, Madam Speaker, the idea would be, certainly we know that there's a big demand for cricket, and we've been trying to either retrofit existing fields or accommodate cricket wherever we can. The idea would be that we would look at our existing fields, see what we can retrofit to, and make those fields as flexible as possible to meet a number of needs through the expansion of the soccer field program. So, and as you likely know, the biggest issue we have is actually land and acquiring the amount of land required for cricket fields, because they take 2 soccer fields. So we will be looking at cricket and meeting further with the cricket community to see how the existing plan can fit in with their goals and their needs.
Okay. And then in terms of curling clubs, I was kind of surprised during the report, so going local in my ward, the Tam Heather Tennis and Curling Club is recognized as a curling club community center, but to actually use it, you have to get a membership. So I was kind of surprised it was recognized as in the community center list of curling clubs. And then the other issue that I have around it, as we talk about the capital plan, is it's not AODA compliant. And a large portion of it, even if I want to use it for community events or tie it in with local community or the school, high school across the street, I can't. So I'm trying to figure out the timeline in the capital budget about AODA compliance, and also being mentioned as a community center.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the AODA strategy is part of our overall state of good repair plan. So when we revisit these facilities that are city assets and do the required state of good repair, we would also address all of the AODA compliance issues at the same time. The implementation strategy will report back more specifically around how we can get to some of these facilities and the timeline around it. So there's that piece of it. The community center piece around Tam Heather, as you likely know, is a legacy piece from the old city of Scarborough around the operation of that facility. And we're certainly happy to revisit with the Tam Heather group the access requirements and how community is accessing that facility.
Okay. And then my last question, Mayor Tory, I just wanted to ask about the whole concept around community hubs, and we approved the Bridal Town one earlier, how as there's more and more interesting community hubs and what they can do and how they tie into the local community, how that plays into the capital plan that you're looking at for even building new community centers.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, that's exactly the approach we would like to take in how we build new facilities, and I think we can demonstrate that we've done that for the last few facilities we've built as well. So wherever possible, especially when we're looking at new facilities and even refurbished facilities, we'll be looking to as many community partners as possible in implementing that capital strategy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Councillor DeGiorgio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question relates to really a concern that I have that I hope has been sort of considered. We've always had a trade-off between state of good repair and providing new enhanced programs for emerging needs, let's say. And it's been my recollection that the state of good repair just keeps growing. We have a problem in keeping up with the state of good repair. So in looking at that trade-off, is the funding over the next 10 years for the new projects that you are contemplating adequate enough does it incorporate the fact that there are growing state of good repair concerns?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the plan speaks to the need for increased investment over the 20-year period in state of good repair, and recommends that we actually increase our state of good repair funding by approximately $23 million a year to bring it annually to approximately $60 million. Certainly in the research that's been done, and Steve Langlois, who's our lead consultant from Monteith Brown Planning, is with us here today, we've identified that our level of spending is significantly lower than that of many other municipalities when it comes to state of good repair. And as we move forward, we'll be working in the implementation strategy to see what the options are around how to increase that spending.
Okay, so if we assume that the next 10 years of funding that we've put into our budgeting has increased the funding for state of good repair, to what extent are we funded for the new projects over the next 10 years?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, for the new projects that are associated with growth, for the most part, as the plan explains, they're funded through various growth mechanisms, whether it's Section 37, Section 42, development charges, and those sort of cash in lieu opportunities. So for the most part, those facilities are looked after through those funding mechanisms. The plan does speak to a funding shortfall in areas of the city where there is no growth and where there is a requirement for significant state of good repair or facility replacement. And the plan identifies over the next 20 years approximately $750 million of spending, which has not been identified yet in our 10 or 20-year capital plan.
All right, thank you.
So I had next Councillor Pasternak, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, it seems if you look at pages 81, 82, that we're heavily dependent to pursue this plan based on real estate activity in the city. To what degree is this plan dependent on robust real estate activity so that we can secure development fees, Section 37, 45, 42?
So through you, Mr. Mayor.
How much risk are we assuming by being dependent on the real estate market?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, well, we generally work with planning on the pipeline of development in addressing growth and population increases in the city. So for the most part, all of the new assets that are identified in this plan that are associated with growth would certainly be dependent on that growth taking place. So they're not so much a risk, but really a growth that would be dependent on the population increase in those areas of the city. On the other piece, our risk is more predominantly on our state of good repair facilities rather than our growth facilities.
So you're to report back and update this every 5 years. Do you think that's fast enough in light of the varieties of the real estate market?
So the plan is to report back in Q2 with an implementation strategy that will set the foundation for the next 20 years. And reporting back in 5-year implements certainly gives us, given the time that it takes to deliver some capital projects, especially the big ones, and the ability to assess the pipeline around development charges and growth, it gives us a good window to report back with. I think when it comes to smaller items that may come up ad hoc, we certainly have the ability to report back on any items that arise, within that time period as well.
Now, one thing staff have to do is decide which projects are priorities, which I know is a cringing job. I have the Canada 150 Community Infrastructure Program decision here. I guess these were grants handed out. I see some councillors received 2 grants and most of us received none. What kind of criteria do you use in deciding which projects jump the queue or get to the top of the list and which projects can wait?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we really work with the City Manager's Office in identifying those priorities based on the grant criteria that's identified for the various funding pots. So we would look in this case, and in the last case around this funding was it shovel-ready projects, things that had already been identified in our 10-year plan as priorities. So we'll continue to work with the City Manager's Office on identifying those priorities as the plan moves forward.
So you work with the City Manager's Office to decide. Okay. This might be minutia, but it came up in the last item. Public spaces and digitally enabled Wi-Fi. It's on page 75. It's also recommendation 75. I guess council has decided not to go down that route. Are you hoping that we revisit it, or what's the plan?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we have been revisiting especially the digital access in a number of our existing community recreation centers now, because in many cases there's no digital access at all, even for staff when it comes to computer access and the rest of it. We've also been working with a number of partners such as the library on how we can access existing wireless networks in facilities. So I can confidently say that as we move forward with new facilities, we're looking at digital access as one of the primary design considerations in those facilities. And we'll continue to move forward as we can with that in coordination, certainly with the city's larger initiatives around digital technology.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. And so my questions are just around the consultants' engagement with councillors, if you can walk me through that. So it's my understanding that the consultants reached out to every single councillor.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, there was an invitation to every councillor to participate in, first of all, a meeting with our consultants around the plan that was moving forward, and that took place in 2016 at the beginning of the plan. And we've reached out a few times as well around meeting with councillors to review the draft recommendations of the plan prior to this meeting today. And I can say that there has been meetings with dozens of councillors on each front.
So, and if there wasn't a face-to-face meeting, there was a phone call, like I had a phone call.
There was an opportunity, however, the councillor wanted to connect.
Right. And so did we have 100% of the councillors communicating? Or meeting?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would say on both, around a 75% involvement.
So that's great. And then the other 25%, would that be, was there connections with their councillor staff, or
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there was certainly an attempt on all fronts, as well as a number of public consultation meetings, pop-up consultation meetings, and an online survey that took place for all residents or anyone that wanted to respond. There was also an opportunity for councillors to respond in writing through a written process and questionnaire that the consultants delivered to everyone. And again, about 75% of councillors responded on all fronts.
So if a councillor is concerned that they weren't heard, their voices weren't heard, that was on them, basically?
I can only speak to the councillors that we spoke to.
Thank you very much.
Well, there we are. All right, Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to reconfirm then, the plan that we have in front of us here, is about 60% of it already in the pipes in our 10-year plan, is that correct, approximately?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay, and what's that total amount, just to...
So it's a $2.1 billion plan
Okay.
over 20 years with approximately a $750 million deficit, mostly around our state of good repair and debt-funded projects. And should also note that in the implementation strategy, we'll be looking at a number of development funding options that will hopefully fill in some of that gap a little bit more.
There's, as I said, more than 60% that is already...
That's correct.
Okay. Now, and I think you mentioned the number, there's for state of good repair, the equivalent of $23 million a year, and new and enhanced about $15 million a year, the equivalent of over 20.
Correct, roughly, yeah.
Okay. And that'll, at this point, that is all under the line. It's just part of our larger deficit in capital.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And then there's nothing coming through the 2018 budget process?
That's correct. We will be reporting at the end of Q2 with an implementation strategy that will begin with the 2019 budget.
Okay. And my other questions around recommendation number 90, which is strengthening the capital spend rate. And in it says, of course, you had challenges in your capital spend rate. So can you go over just some of these strategies that you're looking at to be able to improve that capital spend rate? And I'm assuming that would be in other divisions potentially as well, but can you just go over some of the strategies that you're looking at to improve that?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we have been increasing our capital spend rate over the last few years and have worked closely with financial planning in our budget process to identify additional capital positions to help us deliver those projects. We're also working with procurement and PMMD on some new strategies around capital procurement that may help us advance that plan as well. And we'll be also looking to work with the new citywide real estate agency around any approaches that we can share with them around advancing the plan from a capital delivery perspective.
Okay, and then a little more specifically on recommendation number 90B and C, exploring new building and project management options to accelerate the pace and the use of external project management. So can you describe what that would look like?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. So currently, most of our capital projects are delivered internally through our own capital staff and with, of course, the use of architects and engineers in planning those facilities. There's been a number or a few facilities that we have embarked on that have been design-build through the development process, where the developer will, working with city staff, design that building and then deliver it so that the capital process is actually outside of the city's capital delivery. And that's one of the things through this plan that we're looking at exploring further.
So you would suggest if you're using outside project management, number one, you could probably get it done quicker, I'm assuming, and would you, any cost savings to that, or is that when you're having it in-house as opposed to an outside project manager?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I couldn't speak to the cost savings at this point, but I think we would be looking at the business case around certainly increasing the spend rate and how quickly we can deliver on these projects as the major benefit.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Now, I presently don't have any other people wishing to ask questions of staff, so we do have Councillor Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. My understanding is Councillor Denzelman and Wong has a motion he's going to be placing shortly regarding taking a big picture view, which I'm not opposed to. But I just wanted to ensure for the Don Mills community who have been awaiting this development, you know, as a result of the Cadillac Fairview development, an agreement was struck at the OMB to create a beautiful space, a community space for Don Mills, and with a swimming pool and fitness, a fitness area, et cetera. So I just want to make sure that motion in no way will take the work that's been done, and is actually, we had a meeting last night at Banbury Community Center about this, will in no way take that work off track.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a very, my understanding of the motion is a very high-level motion, looking and directing us to continue to look at co-locations and other opportunities as they arise during the 20 years of this plan, which we're committed to doing. You know, as we describe the plan, we only know in the first 20 years what we know about development right now, and there may be things that arise that create additional opportunities that haven't been identified in this plan, and we want to ensure we leave enough flexibility for us to pursue those things.
Okay, so I fully understand that and appreciate that because it's an evolving landscape. Having said that, I don't want, I guess, the corporate partner involved in this to feel that they don't have to proceed with looking at contamination and an EA. I don't want, I guess, everybody to think, oh, now the city's doing this, we're going to, you know, ease up on our work and not proceed with the kind of the steps that have to be undertaken to get to where, you know, to get to fruition.
Through you,
So I want
Mr. Mayor,
assurance on that.
there is nothing in this plan that would recommend anything different than what is already, you know, on course.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Others wishing to ask questions of staff on the Parks Master Plan? Okay. Well, then I think we can move to speakers. Other members visiting with us from outside the committee? Councillor Carroll. Anybody else? Councillor Davis? Well, we'll see if what Councillor Carroll, you please go ahead. Your turn.
Yes. So I didn't ask any questions, Mr. Mayor, because I did have my opportunity. I'm part of the 75%, so I did have an opportunity to meet with the consultants and staff on the plan last year, but also, or earlier this year. But also, I can't complain. I'm in very much a growth neighborhood, and so largely the needs in both recreation and in parks have been met as we go along through growth dollars in my ward. But that being said, something that I raised with the consultants and something that is a policy piece, and that's why I raised it here with the executive, is we take a very participatory approach. As you know, I've piloted both determining how we will spend Section 37 funds through participatory budgeting exercises, and also the pilot itself, the city manager's office pilot. In all of those conversations, what always comes up, despite the growth, what the residents, when it's left to them and they really start to do democratic decision making, we always get stumped by the question, Yes, there is growth here, but there is a facility that really could meet the growth if we optimize it through what is purely state of good repair work. Why can't we take the growth money and spend it on optimizing this center by improving on what's there and perhaps adding on to it? Why do we have to draw this hard line between the growth dollars and what already exists on that place? That is a policy riddle locked inside an impenetrable metal box with several locks over it. And it's something that I think we have to unlock the more we densify the city. Because in each intensification neighborhood, we're locked out of doing state of good repair work that really does make existing resources better able to accommodate the new population and the existing population. And common sense tells them that's a good use of dollars, wherever they're coming from, whether from growth or from their own tax pockets in terms of our property tax debt funding. And if it's debt avoidance, they don't understand why they can't do it. We need to totally rework an old playscape, and we need to deal with a broken splash pad, but we can't. So we'll take this Section 37 money and build some fancy new play equipment beside it, or workout equipment for adults. Why can't we do it all? And why can't we use the growth money for that? To me, it's a major policy change. It would be a big ask of other governments because the policy starts there. But it's one that I think Toronto uniquely is going to have to put forward sooner rather than later, because in intense neighborhoods, that is what we should be doing with some of that growth money. It actually does serve the new residents to do that. And it's not making sense in any participatory exercise not to be doing it that way. And so we have to at least start to float that question in intergovernmental affairs. Maybe it's 10 years down the road that they make that change, but it's got to be made because we're intensifying right to our city limits in developing suburban transit. Not to be able to regenerate what already exists with the money that will come from development as a result makes no sense to the general population. And I think they're the most sensible people of all. Those are my only comments. Everything else that we can do with what we do have is in the strategy. My only wish would be that instead of doing these general and let's keep working on this master plan recommendations, the specific recommendations of actually increasing funding and actually increasing spend rates on capital, more technically outlined in the full master plan, those are the recommendations I wish you were adopting today.
Thanks, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. I, too, am so pleased to see this report finally come forward. And I've just looked again back to January 2009, a report from the Auditor General who gave us a set of recommendations in 2009 and a request to report in 2010 on a facilities plan for the city. And many of these recommendations are contained in what we have before us. And one of them speaks specifically to what Councillor Carroll just spoke about. But what we've lost in, it'll be 9 years before the capital implementation plan begins, what we've lost in that decade is the additional capacity to actually address what has been over that past decade, a growing state of good repair backlog and a growing gap in terms of facility needs. And so we have to, somehow PF&R and recreation facilities fall down, the priority, the pyramid of priorities when it comes to infrastructure here at the city. And every year we're asking, please, state of good repair for parks, forestry, and recreation. And I fought for however many years to try and get an analysis in the budget process that compared the state of good repair budgets of all of the divisions and the percentage that that budget was committing to bring down those state of good repair budgets. And PF&R continues to fall behind, as had over the 13 years, 14, that I've been here. So I'm very pleased to see what we have here is a very comprehensive look at what we need as a result of growth, obligations we have as in terms of state of good repair, a sense of those activities that need that are changing in our communities, and I think we all recognize that. And it comes forward with a very detailed plan. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now it's up to us. It's up to us as the decision makers to decide whether or not we're going to commit the resources to make this plan real. And what it says very clearly to us is that there will be, on an ongoing basis, a need for $37 million per year, $14.8 million a year for the next 20 years for new and enhanced. It says as well that there will be a need over 20 years for $23 million of state of good repair. So that's $37.8 million in new capital money that we need to build in the 20-year capital plan. $37.8 million over 20 years to make sure that this plan becomes a reality. So we have to put up or shut up when it comes to building the kind of city we want, when it comes to decision-making around the budget. And I hope, and I trust, not hope, I trust that we will find a way to include these kinds of expenditures in our capital budget when it comes to the budget and the implementation plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Are there any other members of the council here wishing to speak? Okay, that would bring us then to members of the committee wishing to speak. Who's first? Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. I want to congratulate the staff in Park and Recreation for a very comprehensive report. I hope that everybody gets an opportunity to look at the 42-page report that's in Appendix A. And I'm also happy to see that it's the second item on the agenda after we just had a very comprehensive look at what we expect from our Smart City program and how the Smart City program's going to build out. Because there was comments during that discussion about providing basic city services or city services that all of our residents expect. And for myself, once you get past roads and some of the other infrastructure and programming, the biggest inquiries that I get are about our Park and Recreation program. Park and Recreation programming, the facilities, people weigh in. I mentioned in my questioning about cricket pitches. I often get comments about why we don't have a lot of rugby field facilities in the city of Toronto, but that's first and foremost. They have inquiries about what they would like to see, and then as is also mentioned in the report about the state of good repair, quickly followed about the discussion in my community meetings about what they need is what they see wrong with the facilities when it comes to a recreation center, that kids going out to skate, that the matting on the floor isn't always the best. It always I don't want to say surprises me, but it's those comments that quickly follow about what's wrong with the building and not always about what the great programming that they get in that facility. But I think what this report does, it outlines the growing needs of our city and how the Park and Recreation staff are going to address them. And I think they do a great job to date. And I look forward to seeing some money in the budget program or the budget process put behind this report because it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to echo Councillor Ainsley's thanks to staff for a very comprehensive, detailed roadmap that takes us over the next 20 years on our recreational aspirations. And it really covers many of the key components that make the city great, because cities are often defined by their recreational assets to make sure we provide opportunities for healthy communities across the city, that they're age-friendly, that we get kids off the computer, off the couch, and into our recreation centers. There's no doubt that the programs we offer in the centers are great for team building, for camaraderie, for friendship, especially for newcomers and in marginalized communities. At the same time, it does come with its risks as far as meeting all the objectives and goals. The dependence on development fees on Section 37 and 42 and 45 revenues means that should there be a significant dip in the real estate market, much of this plan could be at risk. At the same time, I think Council is willing to incur some costs on the tax base and some costs in debt to make sure that no community is left behind. I would simply, just basically in closing, there's a reference to working more closely with the TDSB and looking at vacant properties. I think there's a pivot over there where they're actually pushing back and becoming more and more reluctant to actually sell and circulate properties that are no longer core holdings for the TDSB and no longer have kids in them. I've been at two meetings recently where one group that's been renting an empty school board property for 20 years is offering tens of millions of dollars, and the school board won't sell it. And then there's some green space we're very interested on Tippett Road, and we're getting nothing but radio silence when it comes to doing a deal. But we can continue to pursue it. I just wouldn't bet too much of happening over there. On another side, as far as the private-public partnerships are concerned and working with the TDSB, I've been at a small tennis court private-public partnership with the TDSB for 14 months, where it would be fully funded by private sector with a full public access agreement. We're now dealing with the third staff member over there in partnerships to try and get it done. Maybe the fourth staff member over there will finally come to the table and talk. Just very briefly on Wi-Fi in our parks and public spaces, I think it's important that when kids get out into our parks, onto our playground sets, they can leave their tablets at home and their smartphones at home and their computers at home. We encourage them to participate in the various activities and the assets and resources that we have. I don't think we're encouraging anything by having kids sit there on a bench on Facebook. That's not the point of our parks and recreational assets. We have to think long and hard about whether we make the city Wi-Fi ready across all our parks and public spaces. Council has spoken on the issue, but I assume it'll come up for discussion again. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Pasternak. Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move the following motion and to ask the clerk to display it, please. There we are. So in essence is to asking city staff to report back on a flexible implementation plan, and that will be part of the upcoming report in second quarter 2018. Mr. Mayor and members of council, I do support the staff's recommendations that are before us, and I think this, and also a huge thank you to city staff for doing an excellent job. This is good news. This is great. So the plan is not only exciting and promising, but also I believe that what we need to do as elected officials is to keep an open eye to make sure that collectively we're protecting the public interest in whatever way that we can. And this is a plan for the next 20 years. And it will need some tweaking, of course, and this is the kind of recommendation that we're asking for, that little consideration there, and I believe that has to be done. The quality of life of our residents overall is determined, and according to the quality of green space that we have, the quality of recreational amenities that we provide throughout the city, and that's extremely important, the same way that we do with affordable housing, the same way that we do by putting a roof over one's head, the same way that we do in terms of providing reliable public transit all throughout the city. I think that's providing green space and quality of recreational and amenities is extremely important. Why? Because those are essential services. Mr. Mayor, is one of the things that locally within Ward 17 is that we are going through an unprecedented demand for recreational services and programs, and also the huge waiting lists that we have there. And that's been compounded now by the level of gentrification that's taking place in the community, which is a great thing, it's a good thing. But somehow one of the concerns within all of that is that the state of good repair of the only community center that we have there, which is adjacent to a neighborhood improvement area that's a community need, literally speaking. Our only community center, the J.J. Pechinin Community Center, was built in the late 70s. And the building, of course, is aging, and like other buildings across the city as well. So the plan that's before us, it calls to prioritize investments over the next 20 years. But this facility that's extremely essential in this community is nowhere in the radar, in spite of the dozens of meetings that we have within the community and city staff over the years. Just to give you a classical example in terms of what's happening there, the outdoor swimming pool has been closed down even during the summer, during the last 3 or 4 years, over and over again, until we had to do some major repairs there, thanks to the federal infrastructure funding that was extremely helpful. Floors, bathrooms, and multi-purpose rooms that are very small are totally old and outdated, and we are spending money over and over again there. In terms of mechanical repairs, we have electrical, heating, air conditioning, plumbing, that literally speaking, the building had to be closed because of that. So the question is, overall, if the life expectancy of the complex is coming to an end, now moving forward, where is the plan? Where is the plan to enhance or to replace the building if needed at whatever point? And I think that these bandage solutions are working for now, but at the end, it will be a waste of money, probably. There will be some level of inefficiencies there. So I think that in terms of the nature of this motion is to give city staff the flexibility for them to look into it and to come back later, and that to be on the second quarter of 2018, just to look at whatever needs to be done as we move forward. And I do support the recommendations within the report, Mr. Mayor, and I think this is a great thing. Thank you.
Councillor Palacio. Councillor Burnside, Councillor Crawford.
Can I just have a point of order, if
Yes.
possible? I just want to, if the clerk or you, is this in order, this particular motion? I'm concerned that on a plan that's not going to be really coming to 2019, that this just opens up every councillor to start bringing all of these smaller minutia kind of items that could be important into this bigger plan, and I'm a little, I just need to question the authenticity.
I know we had all hoped that we wouldn't have that, because of course that everybody would have something they'd want to put on, and there'd be 45, if not more of these. I might have several. But I understand it is in order, but I can see if the clerk has any feeling, because I understand they also kind of worked on the wording such that it was not directive or in any way prescriptive of what goes on here, but so I
appreciate if they could maybe rule on that. Or just explain how it is in order.
Because of the wording that it just talks about consideration here and doesn't direct or prescribe, or that's why it's in order. As I say, we were also trying to make sure there weren't very many of these, if any, and so.
My concern is that we've just opened up a floodgate for council.
I understand. Councillor Burnside?
Thank you, through you to the councillor. Was this community center examined as part of the facilities master plan?
One thing that I know is through the consultation process, the consultant was invited to speak to the advisory council of the Piccinini Community Center and on those concerns, and the community has been voicing those concerns to city staff as well. And
Okay,
that's
thank
been
you.
for the
Sorry, I
last
got a lot, I just have a lot of questions. Are you aware that every 5 years in this plan, there's a mechanism to review things like growth and so forth? And presumably, if that facility was examined as part of the master plan, which I think every facility in the city was, it would be captured in that.
That was the very question that I had to the deputy city manager as well as to her staff with regards to the implementation strategy as we move forward within the 5 years or whatever else. So the question to them for clarification is that to look, there are some aspects within that structure that they really need to look into it.
So,
So
okay,
they can
so
come back within the 5 years. I'm not asking at this point for the building.
So why would you
Absolutely not.
center out one, if you think there are some deficiencies in the actual plan and the review process, why would you single out one community center and not look at the city as a whole?
My understanding was there was a motion there was going to be a motion on the floor to include all. Now, as a local councillor, let me tell you that I do support any ads that comes forward because that would be a wise investment if we have to invest into it. But I'm standing up for my community, and that's the purpose of this one.
So if you support the rest of the city, would you be open to just a motion that actually looked at that, added that process for all the community centers across the city? So we don't need to single out that specific one.
Well, I would like that to be for the deficiencies that I've been talking about and the problems that we have as it relates to health and safety to be included. If there is, you want to add something else to it, by all means.
Okay. And then my last question, because I'm not sure about the whole process and how we look at things, but you talked about potential liabilities due to health and safety issues. Would that not be part of the ongoing process that when we look at all our buildings in Parks and Rec or whatever facility? Like, I'm just unsure as to why that facility needs that specific motion. I would have thought that's sort of an analysis we do citywide on all our facilities.
I'm absolutely sure that when city staff reports on this, they're going to look at every single facility across the city, and this is just one little thing that will be part of the whole. It's not the report's going to include only this facility at all.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions of the mover? Okay. Then we would go back to the speakers list on which I don't have any names, but I now do. I have Councillor Burnside and Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the plan itself, obviously, I think all councillors always want more, and I'm sure I'm in that boat. But I do appreciate all the hard work and a lot of the answers that we've had in ongoing discussions. I guess the one concern I have is that it's stated that in 2007 there's a waiting list of about 90,000 people. That grew to 198,000 in 2016. And I'm not sure that this plan necessarily, if it just stems the flow or if it actually is going to reduce that. And so I think maybe, and that's why I asked the question of if more money would actually be helpful to move this process forward. 20 years is a little bit long for people to wait if you have a 5-year-old, 25 or 20 or whatever that number is. So I think it's a great start. I will probably be pushing something a little more financially ambitious if I had that opportunity. And I will have to say that I will not be supporting Councillor Palacio's motion. From what I read and from what little I know of City Hall, seems like all those points would have been covered by staff. It was a very comprehensive review, and I think we're getting into a very dangerous area when we start piling on about one community center. I have lots of wants, lots of needs. Mr. Bentley over there can attest to all the phone calls and emails and whatnot, but I think we have to look at this as a city perspective, and if there's a great idea, to add to the conversation, fantastic. But in terms of singling out one community facility for some sort of special treatment, I'm totally opposed to that.
Thanks, Councillor Burnside. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to wax on poetic with the praise again for staff and the consultants who definitely reached out to, I guess, 75% of us. Well, 100%, but heard from 75. And I have to say it's quite comprehensive. It's fantastic. It takes us a long way forward. And what I like especially about it is that, you know, we always hear about downtown gets everything. And in an approach to build one city, you look at this report, look at the new community centers coming in. They're all over Toronto. Great representation, so no one can complain. And I would just encourage councillors, you know, if you haven't, when staff reaches out to you about an item or an issue or initiative that to just try, if you can't get out to talk to them, get your staff to talk to them so that you can be part of the conversation instead of you know, complaining about it afterwards. All right, so great job.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Deputy Mayor Min Wong.
Yes, I have a motion. Really? General Manager, Park, Forestry, Recreation, consult with local councillors on opportunities to combine and/or co-locate facilities as recommended in Appendix B in order to achieve the objectives of the plan and report back on these opportunities as part of the implementation strategy and/or as they arise. What does that mean? So in the area that's shared, I think, by Councillor Burnside and Councillor Robinson, we're getting a lot of investment. So we have a lot of facilities. So we've got Angela James, we've got Dennis Timber Resource Center, we've got proposed replacement of the Civitan ice rinks, and also a new community center at Shops Dunn Mills. So great opportunity, chance of a lifetime. We've got to get it right. We could build 5 different facilities, or we could look at a grand vision of building one big facility, and this is the opportunity on the Celestica lands. So is this something that we should be looking at? I'm thinking yes. Could you build twin pad ice rink plus big swimming pool, and you know, take all the potential value from these projects and build them into one great site? This is what I wish to look at. And so, not to make any decisions, but maybe present at some future date to the community a choice between, you know, fixing little facilities or tearing down old facilities and building something small, or actually looking at something grand. This is all this report, this is all this does for me, for my neighborhood, but it also gives an opportunity for other councillors all across the city, if there's an opportunity to take small facilities and take any particular investments and build something better. So this is what this motion is, and I hope you'll support it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Min Wong. Other speakers, Councillor Shiner.
So, Mayor Tory, I'm not moving to add anything to the ward, which I represent. I think that's what's in front of us. Has been a long time coming. It's an awful lot of work. It's a fantastic job by our staff to try and identify the needs that there are across the city as a snapshot in time, which is where we are right now and what we might have missed. And it's really is what I call a work plan almost for the future. That being said, I think that there has to be a way to be able to address the concerns that my colleagues might have as they go forward to look at facilities that might need updating or improvements. In the planning division, what they've now come out and they've made public is their work plan, their 2017 work plan, their 2018 work plan, and every year it gets revised. And I think on the work plan for the Parks Department, they should have the opportunity to look at the needs that get identified as the city grows and how they may be able to be added, because you don't start off by putting the funds in just for community center. You start off by looking if there's a need. What is the need in the area? What's growing and what's changing? So if there was some way for the division to come back up with a public work plan as to what they're looking at and had an opportunity for members of council on an ongoing basis to consult with them and ask that their needs be revisited or looked at, I think it would be great. I think there's a problem that we still find, and I looked at it when I looked at the plan. It's our purchasing policies, and the fact that they're very difficult to work within, and they become more and more stringent after we had the MFP inquiry and tried to look at ways to make sure that everything was done proper, above board, which now puts it to a point where very often it's inflexible and it's difficult and it doesn't work well to be creative. So what you find is that the cost to build anything that the city might build is substantially more than what the private sector might build. And I'm not talking about union wages or union staff. I'm just talking about the complexity of our bidding process and how we handle things when we go out, whether it's small projects or larger projects. They take a long time. And an example would be, if you look at the plan, it talks about 2 community facilities within the ward that I represent. One on the former Canadian Tire Alliance is called the Bessarion Community Center. That's been on the books forever, and it's been working its way through the process forever. And I think I was a young man when we hired the architects. And as I've told our General Manager of Parks and Recreation, please tell me when you think it'll open so I can book my Wheel-Trans bus to get me there. Because it takes so long and it's so difficult. And we have to find ways to do those things better within our program, very much so. The other thing that I have a problem with, and I've spoken about before when we look at the funding, is our cash in lieu policy. Cash in lieu is supposed to be cash in lieu for parkland. You can't donate it on the site because very often they're small tights. We take the cash. But that cash isn't used for parkland. Half of it goes citywide and half of it goes to the local community council area, and of the one that's in local community council area, a quarter of that goes back to the local ward, and you can use a quarter of it for capital maintenance projects if they're $50,000 or more. So we're not really funding as we should be funding the needs that we have within our facilities and our maintenance. It was a stopgap method that we put in many years ago, but it's something we have to change. If there's maintenance, it should be maintenance. If it's parkland you want and there's deficiencies, we collect money for parkland, we should use it. If it's benefits within a development that you get, then you can use that for your Section 37 where you may put it. But we're not funding our maintenance on our buildings, in my opinion, in an appropriate manner. And it's not an easy out, because if you're going to take that funding out of the budget, you have to replace it somewhere else. But I have spoken about it before, and I firmly believe you have shortfalls in parkland in the city. The land is getting more expensive. You want to be able to provide it. You collect cash for that. You should use it for that. So the program itself, the plan here, I think is terrific, as I've said. I'm a big supporter of it, but we have to find a way to afford and pay for our needs and do it as efficiently and effectively as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shiner. That brings me to the end. Oh, there we are, Councillor Crawford.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to, speak after Councillor Shiner talking about, efficiencies in the processes, and he's absolutely right. I think we need to be doing that and a lot more. With this master plan that I support, and I want to thank staff for the amount of work that they did. I was involved in it from my local councillor perspective. We will be achieving 60% of this plan in our 10-year capital plan already, which is good. I mean, so don't think that we're not doing anything right now. 60% will be achieved. Leaves that other 40% that we have to manage. Now, we always need to look at things in the bigger context, and when you break down the numbers, $37.8 million over 20 years doesn't really seem like a lot when you're looking at the billions that we're going to be spending. But in fact, it adds up. It adds up considerably, especially over the 20 years. And when you look at the bigger context, and we do this a lot at this council, is we'll look at this individually, and this all sounds great. It's going to pass council. It's something we need to do, and we'll move forward. But then we bring it back to the budget, and then we look at that in the context of all of our other priorities. When we're looking at the TTC, when we're looking at Toronto community housing, transportation, they all add up, and they're all important priorities. But the challenge, of course, is how do we balance all of those priorities out? And that's the discussion we will be having. So it's always important that, yes, this is great that we're doing it here, but then we have to put it at the bigger process where we look at everything in context. And there were those will be coming up, and I'm sure it'll happen at council. Though, look at this, we just have to start raising taxes to make this happen. I don't believe we have to necessarily be raising taxes to make this happen. We need to start working smarter in how we disperse the money across the system, and the efficiencies. When you're looking at, well, development charges, of course, we look at every other opportunity to bring in revenue outside of raising taxes. Our purchasing policies, the project management, and Parks did mention that about, looking at bringing in other people outside to actually do more with the amount of money we have. The bidding process is another example. But one of the bigger examples, and a lot of this work has been happening quietly, probably that people don't realize, is with our finance staff and just trying to strengthen our capital spending rate and smoothing out. What we call smoothing out is trying to actually achieve more in our capital spending without actually spending more, but just being able to look at priorities and smooth it out. I mean, again, Parks right now is at about a 50. We're trying to get it up to 60. If we can get these things to 80 and 90%, we have more of an opportunity to actually increase over a longer period of time our ability to actually do more. So I think there's many opportunities to figure out how we can achieve items like this and other priorities without necessarily raising taxes. It's a challenge, absolutely, but I think that's something that we can do. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Any other speakers that we have not yet heard from? All right, well, I will just say very, very briefly a word of thanks to the staff and to those who've been involved in this. I've had a chance to sort of see it as it's evolved, and it's just a very big piece of work and a very important piece of work, and I think all the comments about us having to get behind it are well taken, and that's the task that lies at hand, I guess, subsequent to the next phase of this. It's going to come back next spring, but I just want to say thank you to the staff for a job well done and for all their answers to questions today. So that would bring us first. I think we've only got one motion from Councillor, oh, there are two, I'm sorry. Oh yes, Councillor Menawong, of course. So there are two motions, and we'll look first then at Councillor Palazzio's motion, and it's up on the screen here, and I'll call the question on that. All those in favor? Recorded vote.
All those in favor? Councillor Balau, Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor Palazzio, and Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Shiner. All those opposed? Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Burnside, Councillor Crawford, Councillor McMahon, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, Mayor Tory, and Councillor Robinson. 5-7, the motion loses 5-7.
Next, we have Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong's motion, which is on the screen in front of you. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right. Then can I ask Councillor McMahon that it might be appropriate that you should move the recommendations as amended by Councillor Minnan-Wong's motion?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay. That brings us then to 28.3, which is the Public Transit Infrastructure Fund Phase 1 update, and there are, I think there's only one. Sorry. The Phase 1 ETIF? All right, I think that's entirely possible, because we got a couple of things I think will be fairly quick here. We had then let's move, with your concurrence, ladies and gentlemen, we move to 28.4, and that is the provincial campaign for provincial funding from municipal infrastructure, and we have a deputation there from Mr. Hamish Wilson.
I think I can switch gears pretty quickly on this one. Certainly, it's wonderful to have the degree of support that we have already from the province. There's a lot of good that they do.
Sorry, Mr. Wilson, there's just a hubbub on the right-hand side of the room in particular, so if you could just keep it down. Mr. Hamish Wilson is deputing. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
No, thank you, Mayor Tory. It's the increase in civility and decorum and respect is appreciated. Thank you, sir. So yes, absolutely, the province can be helpful. We have to seek extra funds at times, but at the same time, I think the effort may not succeed very well because, quite honestly, there are some real issues with how we approach our finances. such as the property tax issues. The rate of inflation in housing is 10%, 15%, 20% sometimes. The increase in property taxes is maybe 2%. So there's a real disparity at times between, if you're in the game, in the system, it's great. Whoosh, everything's going up, you're making a lot of money, but that is not being captured, and it should be more captured, I feel, to make sure that we have credibility with the rest of the province, beyond the City of Toronto, with other municipalities, because yes, our property taxes, though they're high, and I'm not saying that they're not an issue, they're relatively low. The other issue, I think, quite honestly, is we have some room for raising some revenues ourselves that we're not taking advantage of, very specifically the vehicle registration tax. I don't think there's much credibility sometimes when we go and ask for this or that when we're not actually availing ourselves of that $60 million to $100 million. I think that's why the road toll issue went the way that it did. We weren't willing to inflict a bit of paying on our own citizens. And we have to do that for a variety of reasons. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Wilson. Are there any questions of Mr. Wilson? If not, well, thank you very much for your trouble in being here today. Now, next we have number 28.6, fare integration. And there are two deputations on that, and then the technical amendment, but depending on what else happens. Mr. Miroslav Glavich was down for a deputation. Is he canceled?
Sorry, don't we vote?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, on item 4, I forgot to adopt the staff recommendation there, and may I ask for a motion to so do from, I'm sorry, Councillor Davis? Which item? I got a bit confused myself. Moved on to the next item and didn't.
There are questions and speakers and all of that.
Well, I asked, you're absolutely right. I did, you're right. So then questions of staff by anybody on 28.3 and 28.4.
4.
Do I hear any?
I wanted to.
On 4,
Yes.
28.4.
I wanted to ask about the money that's going to cycling infrastructure.
Sorry, Councillor Davis. We skipped over. You're on 28.3.
Campaign for provincial funding for municipal.
Oh, okay. You're on that.
Oh, no, it's 3.
That's what. Yeah. So we're all confused here. And I start with myself.
Okay.
We're on 28.4.
Tell
We
me
skipped over 3 because we were waiting for some information from staff before we proceeded with that. And I just assumed actually there wasn't going to be anything more on 4 aside from the deputation, but I may have been wrong. So we're on 4. We are quite properly questions of staff. Speakers, I don't think I saw anybody who wanted to say anything about that. So I will ask that we do have a motion on 28.4 to adopt the recommendation to receive the report. So moved. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Now, we're still not going to go to 28.3 just yet, Councillor Davis, it may be after lunch, because we're just waiting for this information. So we're going to go to 28.6. On fare integration, we have 2 deputations. And I think we can do that before lunch, and I don't know if there'll be a lot of speakers, but Mr. Glavich?
I'm withdrawing from this item.
You're withdrawing from this item, thank you. Pardon me, Jessica Bell. Ms. Bell here? All right, so I see no deputations on that then. Were there questions of staff on the fare integration report? Councillor Burnside.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Could you just remind me the subsidy, I guess, operating subsidy per passenger in the GTA versus that of Toronto?
We'll have to get back. We'll have to get back to you with that information. We don't have it at our fingertips right now.
Okay, thanks. That's my only question, really.
Which number is this?
Thank you, Councillor Burnside. Are there other questions on 28.4?
This is.
The integration, I'm sorry, 28.6, fare integration. Are there any speakers? Did you want to ask a question, Councillor? Okay. So no other questions? All right, we can move to speakers then. You have a question.
I did. I wondered, the fare integration provides or this initial step, who's it asking? This is the position we took at council. So we've achieved the interim step with this report. Who's there? James, are you answering?
So through the chair, when we reported to council in July of last year on fair integration, we included 2 interim steps in our report. One was about a co-fare option, which is what we're presenting to executive committee today. The second was a recommendation that GO adjust their fare structure to improve things, to improve the situation for riders in Toronto. And that is still something that we're working with Metrolinx on.
Okay, and could you tell us more about where Metrolinx is on the overall fare integration strategy? I know they've had one big round of consultation last year, and then it kind of went quiet. So I know that different municipalities are benefiting more from subsidies from the provincial government than we are. And so what the fares will be will have such an impact on ridership and our strategy for capital investments. And so we've been waiting for this kind of information now for a couple of years, I believe. When are we really going to see the outcome of the consultations and discussions on the full fare integration plan? Do we know?
Through the chair, through the mayor, we're continuing to work with Metrolinx. They are looking at a number of interim steps that they may take over the next 6 to 12 months, I think is safe to say. The broader questions of where is the overall fare structure in the GTHA going?
Yes.
That is probably going to be a longer term sort of conversation with Metrolinx. I don't anticipate that they will be making major changes prior to next year's elections. So, but there are interim steps that they reported to their board that include adjustments to the fare. This co-fare option is another piece that they identified with their board, and a few other steps to set up for a longer term, broader fare integration strategy for the GTHA.
So there is no clear plan for when we will hear what the fares are intended to be in this integrated regional model of transit?
Through the mayor, I don't know that I would suggest there's no plan. They have, they will be reporting back. They will be reporting back to their board again in December on the further consultations that they're doing on fare integration.
And where are they doing further consultation?
Through the mayor, some of the consultations are taking place in the context of the conversations that they're having with stakeholders in the public and soon to be with municipalities on the draft regional transportation plan. They will be wrapping those broader fare integration conversations into those.
The draft regional transportation plan. And when will we hear about the draft regional transportation plan? And what input will we be providing to that?
So through the chair, we have, they're actually Metrolinx will be holding a session for, an information session for councillors next week, actually, and I thought that
oh, very nice.
They released, at their last board meeting, they released a draft of the updated regional transportation plan. We have been working with them over the last couple of years as they have been reviewing the big move, and we will be preparing the city's response, and that will be included as part of our report to council at the end of November on Smart Track. We will also be talking about what we're seeing in the draft regional transportation.
All right, your time,
Okay,
Councilor
thank
Davis,
you.
is up. Just to be fair, Councilor Davis, the draft regional transportation plan has been a public document for some time, and so that's why the city's been able to prepare a response. And so it's not like they rushed us into having a meeting like a half an hour after they released it. It's been public for some time. You were saying thanks very much or something for them having a public meeting next week. The document upon which the meeting is based, seeking input, has been a public document for some time. Yeah, thank you. Okay, did Councillor Layton have questions? To speak, okay. Anybody else outside of the committee that has questions? Are there members of the committee who have questions on fair integration? Okay, then we would move to speakers, and we'll have our visiting member speak first. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This is an issue that we've been working on as a council for now many, many years. I think the first time that I got involved was in 2011 with a motion that Councillor Nunziata and I put forward about making fares on the existing GO tracks trains more affordable. There are essentially two things we need to craft here if RER and if Smart Track are going to work: reliability and affordability. And if one of those two doesn't work, the whole thing's going to crumble. Both the RER provincial portion and our Smart Track portion. So if we don't get that right, we're in big trouble. I want to paint a picture for you, tell you a story. In Liberty Village, this is an area bound by two sets of tracks. It takes about 15 minutes to walk from the heart of Liberty Village around the north tracks and get up to King Street. And then you wait, about 5 streetcars go by that are full, and you get on the next one, and you lumber in traffic on King for about 35 minutes to get to downtown. If you're going on the subway, that's what it takes. So it's about an hour and 20 minutes. It's a 10-minute walk from the center of Liberty Village, that same spot, to a GO train that can get you to Union Station in 11 minutes. That's 22 minutes instead of about an hour and 20. The reason why people don't take it? It's $8 a direction. $5.50 or something thereabouts for the GO train, and then $3 for your subway fare. $8 to get an 11-minute ride. Between Exhibition Station and Union Station is the most expensive per kilometer trip that can be taken on the GO rail line. The most expensive per kilometer trip. So all those people that are getting on the King Street car, probably much of the reason why we have this King Street pilot that's going on, have another way of getting downtown that's faster, that's more reliable because it comes on a schedule, albeit sometimes a disrupted schedule, but it's $8, so they're not taking that trip. And when the province attempted fare integration the first time, what they essentially did is made someone buy both a Metro Pass and a monthly pass, suggesting that they had to do this route 10 times a month, 10 times a week for every month in order for them to recoup their money. That is insane that we would expect that of them. Now, the $1.50 discounted fare, I think, is a step forward. I'm hesitant on saying it's a good step forward. I think it's a step forward, but I think we're going to find that it's not quite enough of real fare integration to give people or to make it enticing enough that they save that hour. And I don't know about you, but every hour in the day is pretty important to me and to my family. And if we're able to come through on real fare integration and another stop, the Smart Track stop, on the GO train on a line at the north side of Liberty Village close to King and Queen, we're going to make a big difference on people's lives, but only if we get the fare integration piece right. So I hope, I'll provide some notice that I expect at council, I'll have some language to try to bolster that position of the city, that we need to act faster. We can't wait until this fare integration deal is up in order to renegotiate what real fare integration looks like. This is our opportunity to do a little experiment, how to get Smart Track to work from day one, and that's figure out how to do fare integration at our existing stations. And it doesn't only serve the people of Liberty Village in Ward 19, it also serves those up in Weston and Davenport, further up the line in York, along Bloor, and further up the line into Scarborough. And I really think that this one, and I know that the mayor agrees, that if we can make better use of those lines, we'll be able to make people's lives a whole lot better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Councillor Davis.
Thank you. Councillor McMahon and I both also recognize exactly the same situation at the main subway station and the Danforth GO station as a place where we could be providing relief on the main Bloor-Danforth line and at Yonge and Bloor if it was financially, there was a financial incentive to cross over and get on the GO train. Right now, there was a pilot project at the main and Danforth GO stations to encourage people to do just that, and it was a failure. And it failed because the pricing of that trip did not encourage people to do it. So the price point will be the key, as Councillor Layton said, as to whether or not this is a real option for residents. So this is, yes, Councillor DiCiano, your phone is ringing here. It is distracting. So I hope that we will continue with this discussion to make sure that we do achieve the best possible price point to make this a realistic option, to use GO and RER and Smart Track as an alternative to the TTC. It is the key to making it work. I seem to see here that the seniors subsidy on the double subsidy is not quite the same, and I will come and ask questions about what the rationale was for that. And thank you for this report and for the work you're doing, and I look forward to the GO consultation.
Thanks, Councillor Davis. Are there speakers on the committee wishing to speak? Councillor Ainsley?
That I agree with this. And as somebody that uses the GO train all the time, and I'll speak from personal experience. I come in from Guildwood in Eastern Scarborough. I'm also on the board of the Canadian National Exhibition Association. And for me, that somebody that takes the GO train all the time, I find it very efficient coming in from Scarborough. The quickest way for me to get back and forth to the CNE is the one stop on the GO train. My very first meeting after I took it, and I used the Presto card, so to come in from Scarborough, each way cost me $6. For me to go from the Union Station to the CNE on the GO train is $5 each way. And the first time that took place, and at the end of the day, I was using my Presto card, I went to the fare booth at Guildwood, and I said, there's something wrong with my card. I said, I lost like almost $12 in fares today, or $11 and in change. And he took the card and he looked at it and he said, well, you went back and forth from Union Station to the CNE today, back and forth. And I said, I did. And he goes, well, it's roughly the same cost of you going from back and forth from Guildwood almost in Pickering, back and forth to Union Station. And so, that needs to be fixed. And I think that's a glaring issue we have with the fare integration, and, not just on this line. With the TTC, I remember years ago when I first started taking the GO train, and there was a fare integration with the TTC and the GO train. I still can remember the boards up Meritory where the TTC logo, they duct taped it over until they had the boards replaced, and I started using it. What happened? They're like, well, they just did away with the fare integration. And often when I'm on the GO train now, people come up to me and say, why don't we have better fare integration? I'm coming from Scarborough, out in the Rouge, far eastern Scarborough. I have to go downtown. The quickest way for me to get to my office is the TTC, and I end up, line up or paying that fare. And so, if we're going to improve the quality of our transportation network in the city and get people out of their cars and make it easier for them, fare integration right across the city is a very important component that needs to be done and done right, but it is something that definitely needs to be achieved. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ainsley. If there's no one else, I'm going to I have a motion and a very brief comment to make. Did you want to speak, Councillor Barlow?
Just very briefly.
Go ahead.
Just very.
Could I just get the concurrence of the committee to extend what will probably be a couple of minutes to just accommodate these finish the item? Thank you very much. Carried. Do you want to speak as well, Councillor Shiner?
No, just on the one of the item.
No, I'm going to deal with that. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Barlow, Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I represent a community that has strongly advocated for the integration of these rail lines into our transit system. And for many, many years, I think because we have so many also of these lines in our community, we often say we see the trains go by and we can't get on them. And now we're starting to have the stations and the fare integration is coming. But I do think, I agree with some of my colleagues have said that we need to start moving into that model a bit more aggressively, and we need to start integrating it properly. There's no reason why we need to wait until all the stations are built, all the full integration is done. we can start heading in that direction. I think the pricing is good, the education, making people understand that they have now this available and making it appealing to them so they can use it. I think we need to start working on that, and we need to be more aggressive about it, because it's true, the RER and the smart track will only work if we have two things: convenience, physical convenience, that the stations are close by and convenient for people to use, and the price is affordable and convenient to use. And if we don't get one of these, it will not succeed, and we need to start working. The same way that we're creating the station, the physical stations now, we need to create the financial model now.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Barlow. Any other members wishing to speak? Well, may I just briefly, first of all, I have a motion which is just technical in nature. The original wording suggested we authorize the TTC, the CEO of the TTC, to enter into the agreement, and we can't actually authorize that. So it just says that we authorize the city manager in consultation with the CEO of the TTC. So it's just a minor wording change. May I just, since I moved this motion and had the chance to say a few words, first of all, just say that I completely concur with the sentiments expressed about the importance of fair integration. And it isn't just about having RER Smart Track work. It is about the fact that if we want people to genuinely feel they have an option, both inside Toronto, and that's our particular concern, obviously we're Toronto councillors, but if we want there to be any sense of the ability of people, as I think they want, to move around the region to get to work. There's a lot of people in the city who work elsewhere in the region, and we want them to be able to get to their jobs and use public transit instead of their cars. Then fair integration is essential. And I'll make a comment that's sort of laudatory of the province and one that is, or considerate of their situation, and one that is critical. The one that's critical is that even after this deal, and I described it always in my own public reaction to it as being a step forward, and I'm like Councillor Layton, I wouldn't go further than to say it's a step forward, only because it perpetuates an unfairness that exists both for people from Liberty Village but others in the City of Toronto, where whichever way you look at it, the subsidy they're receiving or the cost they're paying on a per kilometre basis relative to other people in the region is unfair. And I said this morning, it is frustrating, and I've been here a shorter period of time than many, so I can't imagine the frustration many others of you feel who've been here for a long time, that Toronto is somehow treated, I'm not sure whether it's as a milch cow of some kind where everybody can just afford to, to just pay up, or whether it's that somehow people don't recognize there's an unfairness here, but it's unfair. But you take these things one step at a time, and this is a step forward, a small step forward, and I want to acknowledge that. In the province's favor, I will say that on the overall issue, and I've been to at least one, maybe two of these consultative meetings, and the task involved of trying to bring together, I think it's 9 transit systems, and sort of accommodate their views in an effort to reach a fair integration for the region is big. And if I were them, I'm not sure I'd be wanting to do one-off deals with everybody, because I don't think that can lead to a true regional fair integration. So I'm somewhat understanding of the challenge that they face in trying to sort of bring together all these different transit systems, all of whom have their own agendas, including us. I would just like to see us start with the fairness, the fundamental fairness of saying whatever the deal is that's in place today, and it's by and large consistent in every other region except Toronto, that we should get the same deal. But this is a step forward. It's not all the way there, and we'll carry on fighting on this, because it is crucial to the ability we have to offer people the transit options they need, including the above-ground rail, to move them around the city and to get them out of their cars, which has to be something that's crucial to us. So if there are no other comments, I hadn't seen anyone else, we will then call the question first on the technical amendment that I moved. All those in favor? Recorded vote.
All those in favor? Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Balau, Councillor Crawford, Councillor DeGiorgio, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, Mayor Tory, Councillor Palacio, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Robinson, and Councillor Shiner. Sorry? All those opposed?
Right.
Carries unanimously.
Thank you. And then we move to the main recommendation as amended. All those in favor? All those in favor? Opposed? Carry. Could I just get your concurrence on one more thing before we adjourn for lunch, which is that we time the Etobicoke Civic Center matter, which is item 28.12, for 2 o'clock, only because there's a number of staff that are here for that item, and I think we can deal with it, but it would be good if we had a time so they don't have to wait all afternoon. Is there a general concurrence for that, 2 o'clock? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We'll stand adjourned until 1:30.